Yo, Atlas speaking and welcome to part 25 of What If I Was Reincarnated in the Naruto world as the legendary Konoha outsider. Let the tale begin. Chapter 494. I need some time, Captain. Itachi momentarily glanced at Takuma as his voice echoed in his head. It was a difficult task to buy any amount of time during live combat, especially against someone on the level of Orochimaru. He deliberated whether involving Takuma and others would be worth the risk. They had already lost an operative, and the rest weren't faring well. Would involving them in a hastily conceived plan put them in danger? He was of the mind to face Orochimaru alone without unnecessary risk. He internally sighed and sent his thoughts, "There will be no discussion if I disapprove. Be quick." Understood. Itachi returned his full attention to his enemy and stared at the stolen face of his kinsman, now a hollow vessel for a snake's parasitic obsession. The sight of the Sharingan on the vile face was a profanation, a mockery of a life snuffed before its time and a monster's convenience. Though they had only spoken a handful of times, he remembered Uchiha Gouki. They had sparred a few times when he was 5 years old, and Gouki, being a few years older, was chosen as one of his first opponents among the clan's youth. Their matchups only lasted a week before it was decided that Gouki wasn't a suitable match and was replaced by older academy students, Jinin, and eventually even a handful of Chunin. Once the word spread, no one wanted to spar with him because losing to a 5-year-old was humiliating. Since then, he had mostly sparred against his parents and Shui. Even if they only knew each other in passing, a dark rage crept its cold tendrils over his heart, demanding that Orochimaru pay in blood. He felt the burning itch of the Mangekyo Sharingan, a temptation that he struggled with each time he fought. All power corrupted, and power this great corrupted greatly. Even the thought of it made his chakra twitch in anticipation. He ignored the enticement and calmed himself. He had already used his eyes the day before, and if he kept trading his precious sight every time he faced danger, he would go blind before getting to see Sasuke grow up. He focused on the pain from the wound in his side and let the anger drain through it. Regardless of whether Takuma managed to come up with a plan, he still had to continue fighting one way or another. Through the crimson lens of the Sharingan, Itachi watched the translucent, wet shimmer of his opponent's new skin, which had collected grit and soot from the battlefield. The man's lungs fought for air, a lingering tax from his shedding. Deep within the body, the flow of chakra was dimmer and much more reserved, providing the insight that discarding bodies to avoid injuries came at a staggering price, and thus had to be used sparingly. However, the eyes, the stolen Sharingan, were still just as manic. Orochimaru moved with a boneless, predatory grace. He flicked his wrist, and the Kusanagi sprang forth towards Itachi's throat. Itachi leaned back, the steel whispering past his Adam's apple, and hammered a palm into Orochimaru's elbow to lock the joint. The Sannin didn't resist the lock and leaned into it. The arm felt like it had no bone in it as it bent in the other direction before a cluster of vipers burst from the sleeve. Itachi darted back with a body flicker, a micro-jump that left a trail of afterimages. The snakes tore through the ghosts, but the real Itachi descended from a blind spot with his short sword aimed at the base of the Sannin's skull. Body flicker in a fight? Must have learned from the best. Orochimaru grinned wildly as his Sharingan caught the flicker of Itachi's shadow. He didn't turn, he triggered the Kusanagi. The blade shot backwards, extending through his own armpit to impale the airborne Itachi, a calculated sacrifice. Itachi twisted midair, and the extended blade grazed his ribs instead of his heart. As he landed, he slammed his heels into the mud. Water release, flowing chain binding. Link chains the thickness of an arm tore through the earth. Orochimaru leapt, his body twisting like a ribbon, but one of the chains managed to catch on. Itachi closed the distance and landed a brutal elbow-to-jaw connection that sounded like a breaking branch. Orochimaru's head snapped back, but he used the momentum to wrap his legs around Itachi's waist. In the air, Itachi weaved a quick set of hand seals before placing his hand over Orochimaru's chest, who similarly placed his hand over Itachi's body. As the chakra bubbled in Itachi's body, about to rush forth in a fiery blast, it was suddenly sucked out of him before it could form the ninjutsu. Orochimaru grinned as he absorbed the chakra and then dragged them both into the mud. They rolled while exchanging blow after blow. Orochimaru managed to rip the ANBU mask off, while Itachi cut the sash around the Sannin's forehead, leaving a gash. The Kusanagi shrank before shooting out towards Itachi's neck. Itachi slammed the tip of his short sword into the flat of the blade, pushing the legendary weapon away from its target, but it still managed to graze his skin, which leaked a drop of blood. Itachi thrust his empty hand forth, intertwined it with Orochimaru's, and began using their two joined hands to weave hand seals. Orochimaru's eyes widened as he froze for an eternal moment before thrusting his bony fingers over Itachi's mouth, just as the Uchiha was sucking in air. He saw the flow of chakra within Itachi, a fiery chakra gathering in the lungs, and knew a fire release was coming. Itachi's eyes widened in utter panic as his mouth was sealed shut and the fire-natured chakra burst inside his body. His stomach and chest expanded in an explosion as a short jet of fire shot out of his nostrils, followed by black smoke. The Sannin laughed maniacally, enjoying the pain on Itachi's face as he pushed the young Uchiha to the ground. He clawed his fingers toward Itachi's eyes and pushed the eyelids back as a crazed smile stretched across his face. "They call you the future of the Uchiha clan, and you're certainly worthy of that title, but rest easy because I'll elevate the Sharingan and its legacy to heights the Uchiha clan has never seen." Orochimaru pushed his fingers to pop the trembling eyes out, his heart hammering in anticipation when the scenery changed slightly. He was no longer straddling Itachi, instead, he was on the ground with Itachi atop him. He looked up at the youngster's calm face, the previous injuries caused by his own jutsu nowhere to be seen, as Itachi pushed his finger over Orochimaru's eyes. "These don't belong to you, they never did and never will. I'll take them back to right this wrong," Itachi said and then dug into the eye socket. "No!" The two opposing jinjutsus shattered simultaneously, and the two men who had fallen to the ground stood up. The Jinjutsu battle had started with Itachi's attempt to blast Orochimaru with a fire release, only to have his chakra absorbed. They had the same idea and used the moment to apply Jinjutsu on each other. When Orochimaru cast his Jinjutsu, Itachi flipped it back on him. "We're ready, Captain." "Go on," Itachi said while feeling a strain in the back of his head. The mental exchange only lasted a few seconds of real time, but it was a strain on their mental capacities and chakra reserves. He listened to the plan and instantly had a problem with it, but Takuma seemed to sense his opposition and convinced him that he would keep the danger and risk to a minimum, the minimum possible in the situation they were trying to get into. Lord Chosa's involvement was a source of confidence. "You have permission," he finally replied, "but get everyone away for now if you don't want to die. A-rank ninjutsu are coming." Straight-faced. Takuma felt his heart hammer in his chest. He had said that he had a plan, but with every passing second, the realization that he was putting himself in charge of people's lives hit him directly. The weight of the responsibility was unlike anything he had ever felt. It was far different from his responsibilities as the leader of a team like Raidal Squad or Narcotics Task Force. He had been in battle with others, but he was never in charge and mostly fought alone, without being responsible for others, even when others were around. The closest he could remember was a farm raid he had done with the Narcotics Task Force, but that was literally life or death for everyone involved. Here, he had volunteered for something that wasn't asked of him. His face scrunched up with those thoughts, which didn't get better as he looked at the afternoon sun casting bloody streaks across the wreckage of an area that, barely a few minutes ago, was still a lush forest. The air was thick, a choking mixture of vaporized mud, the smell of ozone, and heavy smoke, all made worse by an intense heat that lingered and stung even after the jutsu was gone. He had to be realistic about the situation before him. When two shinobi of this caliber fought, the world around them started to dissolve. He had possibly sealed his and others' fates. "I need time, Captain," he said internally, a part of him hoping that Itachi would shut him down. "There will be no discussion if I disapprove. Be quick." "Understood." The response didn't make him feel better, even though Itachi had taken the burden of the final decision. Takuma hastily looked around at what he had to work with. Anko, Itachi, 4 out of 6 assault squad Chunin, and Akimichi Chozo were rushing to their location. On any other day, the group, just from Itachi's presence alone, would inspire confidence, but the enemy was Orochimaru. Did he have it in him to come up with something that would harm a Sannin? No, I can't think like that, he told himself, and instantly felt a jolt of pressure as the two Jonin moved to clash again. He looked around again at the people he had and the crude plan that had begun to take form until he had something usable. It wasn't his best work, but he didn't have the comfort of time and resources to improve through iteration like he would if he were at home. He quickly gathered everyone and began speaking of his plan while tapping Jonin Kawamochi so she could relay it to Lord Choza in real time. A lot of things could go wrong, Choza said. My suggestion is to leave this to Operative Weasel and Lord Choza, Kawamochi chimed in. Perhaps it was cowardly, but he was ready to drop the matter immediately. We should do it, Anko suddenly said with a determined look in her eyes. Hidden behind it was a motivation fueled by a sense of revenge. In her current state, she would have agreed to anything. Takuma was about to say something, but was interrupted by Hopper. The assault squad is ready as well. He looked at Takuma and said, we have confidence in Raidel's plan and our ability to do our part in that plan. Takuma was frankly touched that they believed in him, and while it increased the pressure on him, it also had a calming effect. His heart was still beating fast, but his head felt suddenly cool. If everyone does their job, we can pull this off, he said, nodding to the people around him. Even if things go wrong, I feel that we can bail with minimal damage, he said, glancing at Anko because the plan inadvertently put her at the most risk. It completely went against the reason why he had chosen to stay behind, but given what everyone had told him about what they could do, the plan only made sense if she was in a specific position. Then we proceed with the plan, Choza said. Even though Kawamochi didn't say anything directly, Takuma could feel that she wasn't enthusiastic about the plan when there was a pause before she connected them to Itachi. He couldn't even blame her because he understood where she was coming from. We're ready. Go on. Takuma told Itachi the plan and could feel that the Jonin had problems with it. He took a deep breath and recalled the confidence that Anko, Hopper, and his crew had shown in him. Despite his own personal doubts, he took a deep breath and projected confidence as he presented his plan to Itachi, who responded very quickly. You have permission, but get everyone away for now if you don't want to die. A-rank ninjutsu are coming. Takuma's eyes widened, and all the thoughts about responsibility vanished, overtaken by fear as he looked at everyone and yelled, "Run!" He didn't have to say anything else because everyone felt a surge of chakra in the atmosphere, and they instantly knew what was coming. The entire group, including Yatso and Koyol, who were abruptly picked up, rushed as far as they could from the two Jonin. They ran as the world began to dissolve. Chapter 495. The steam soon began to let up, allowing the sunlight to once again meet the ground. The patch of forest had gone from lush trees crowding each other to a scorched clearing, and then to a pit of obsidian glass filled with bubbling, ash-filled black water, creating an artificial pond. It would take nature several decades to reverse the damage done in the span of minutes, and even then, things would never be the same. The two who had caused the destruction stood on the slanted walls of the pit. Itachi was winded, his chest heaving in shallow, jagged jerks. A map of bruises, cuts, and red scratches littered his frame as he leaned against the cooling, glass-slicked walls of the crater. With a steady thumb, he smeared away the blood trailing from his lip, the lower half of his shattered mask long since lost to the debris. Through the dust, his Sharingan remained fixed on the far side of the pit, where Orochimaru once again pulled himself out from the tattered husk of his old skin, his stolen eyes glowing with a crimson light. Is that all, Itachi? You have more, I know you do. Show me the real power of the Uchiha Jutsu, Orochimaru said with a casual laugh, as though what had happened wasn't much. Despite his spotless demeanor, he didn't make a move. The strain of using an A-rank ninjutsu was heavy even for the legendary Sannin. Itachi ignored the snake and instead replied out loud to the voice in his head, "Yes, I have something like that." Talking to others while I'm still here is rude, Orochimaru said, guessing that the leaf must have sent a Yamanaka Jonin along if they were bringing the fight right to Danzo's home. His eyes narrowed when he saw the chakra inside Itachi flare. The ANBU captain suddenly launched himself into the air from his leaning position while his hands blurred into hand seals. He swung his short sword, buzzing with chakra. Orochimaru moved his position a moment before a wind cutter carved out a gash in the wall behind him. He had more pressing matters as a kunai with an explosive tag landed near him. He ignored it as it wasn't close enough to harm him, but then it exploded and shattered the black glass covering the surface, causing him to slip and sink down. His eyes widened, and he looked up to see a barrage of kunai, all laden with wind-natured chakra, flying towards him. They clashed against each other, changing directions and getting faster with each bounce. His crimson gaze tracked each projectile, and the future unfurled in front of his eyes, allowing him to twist it to his desire by throwing a kunai of his own into the fray. One collision sent the intricately executed barrage aimed to trap him into disarray. He no longer paid them any heed, as none touched him while they fell around him, gouging the earth. His bony fingers signed hand seals for a wind-release ninjutsu, and he raised his palm at Itachi, who was arching through the air towards him. The two B-rank wind-release ninjutsu clashed against each other. Orochimaru was hit by a wall of air that crushed him into the ground behind him, while shallow gashes opened up throughout his body. Itachi slashed a cannon blast of wind with his short sword, buzzing with wind chakra, reducing its power, but he was still violently thrown back and slammed into the far end of the pit. Orochimaru laughed as he pulled himself away from the dirt, as the winds continued to cut and smash him down. Managing to unstick his chest and head, he was about to shoot himself across to Itachi when he noticed an ANBU nin standing on the surface of the dirty waters. Takuma finished weeding hand seals and dumped the chakra he had gathered into the water beneath his feet. Water release, water dragon missile jutsu. A darkish-gray dragon, bigger than anything Takuma had ever created, erupted from the artificial pond's surface. It visibly lowered the water levels as more and more water rose into the air. Veins popped on Takuma's forehead behind his mask as he gritted his teeth under the weight of the water he was lifting. He had put in twice the amount of chakra he should have to make the dragon more powerful, which had worked despite being terribly inefficient, but it had also made it difficult to control. Takuma opened his mouth, and the dragon's roar drowned out his own. He brought his hands down and sent the unruly dragon right at Orochimaru, who was still trapped in Itachi's ninjutsu. The massive creature of water slammed into the side of the crater, causing a powerful explosion in its own right, even though it looked small in comparison to what they had seen only a minute ago. His shoulders rose and fell with every straining gulp of air. His work wasn't done. He raised his hands to form hand seals as he jumped away. At the same time, a shadow blurred past him, heading towards Orochimaru. The real challenge had only begun. Laughter pierced through the clearing as a sopping wet Orochimaru emerged from the explosion. He didn't look any more injured than he did before. Using the little insects as a distraction to cast a genjutsu on me, are we now, Itachi? He had a manic look on his face as his eyes glowed a sharp red. He didn't spare a glance at Takuma, an insect he could crush under his feet, and only sought Itachi. Did you forget we have the same eyes? This level of genjutsu isn't going to work on me. Bring me something stronger. He sent a powerful jolt of chakra through his body that shattered the genjutsu, revealing what was being hidden from him. Takuma suddenly became visible right in front of him. His feet were spread wide, his hips were low, along with his knees for balance and a powerful foundation. His toes were clawing at the dirt beneath him to anchor him down. He extended his left arm forward while he pulled his right arm back. With his shoulders retracted, pulses of chakra began stacking into his right arm, and when it was completely saturated, all of it was compressed right into his hand to make space for more chakra. It continued to be compressed until there was no space, and his arm glowed with an intense blue. How is this for an insect? Takuma said, his neck and jaw visibly strained as he struggled to handle that much chakra. Even if he could compress that much chakra into his arm, he didn't want to do that, because the blowback was going to punch through even the Earth spear that was running through his body. Chakra augmentation, all-out kamikaze. Takuma pushed off the ground with such force that the earth beneath him cratered. He threw his entire body behind the fist's arc, putting the entire momentum into the arm as it whipped. Orochimaru's body felt like it had no bones in it as the snake tried to dodge, but it was too late as the full force of the augmentation hit him. The compressed chakra was released in a concentrated point right where the heart was in the body. The blue glow of the chakra blinded one side of the crater as Takuma's clone was immediately destroyed by the backlash. On the other side of the crater, Takuma flinched when the memories and experience hit him, along with all the pain that burned and stabbed his arm. He pursed his lips because he didn't know what impact the augmentation had on Orochimaru. He didn't have to wait long because, when the dust settled, Orochimaru stepped out with blood dribbling out from the corner of his mouth. He had a grin on his face, but his exposed chest was caved in and covered in a white snake's reptilian scales. That level of injury would have killed most people, if not instantly put them out of commission for a very long time, and yet, the man stood there as though it were nothing. A bug's bite, Orochimaru scoffed, but then he stepped forward, and his feet faltered. "It worked!" Takuma exclaimed, and just at that moment, four chains shot through the air and wrapped themselves around Orochimaru. A moment later, a red chakra streamed through them, covering Orochimaru's body. What? Orochimaru's eyes narrowed as he looked at the chains. Barrier ninjutsu. On the other end of the chains were the 4 members of the assault squad, jointly casting a very special form of barrier ninjutsu inspired by the extinct Uzumaki clan of the Hidden Whirlpool, called barrier ninjutsu, Red Chains of the Whirlpool. It was reserved for ANBU and was only taught to all high-level assault squads due to the difficulty. Successfully learning the jutsu was one of the requirements for assault squad operatives, and until they learned it, they were probationary members. Orochimaru's eyes widened when suddenly the Sharingan deactivated, and moving chakra through his body became difficult. The 8 chakra gates in his body tightened the flow of chakra, and the natural frequency of physical and spiritual energy was sent into disarray, making it difficult for him to mix and mold chakra. He suddenly spat a mouthful of blood as whatever jutsu he was using to heal or maintain his injuries failed. Takuma felt a surge of confidence as the plan seemed to work, and he quickly weaved hand seals for his part of the duties, but just when he thought things were looking up, a monstrous pressure descended on him that made him collapse to one knee. It was the physical expression of the chakra, and it felt like he was being strangled by a large snake. It was nothing as he had ever felt. Even Jonin Onokuma from Maizuru quarters couldn't hold a candle to the pure bloodlust choking him out. Bugs that don't know their place get squashed, Orochimaru declared as his Sharingan came back full force with a murderous glow. He's already figured it out, Hopper murmured with a tone of utter disbelief. The barrier jutsu disrupted the natural frequency or rhythm of the 2 energies. The target was so naturally used to them that they didn't even need to think about it, rendering the conscious mixing of chakra strenuous for most people. For someone like Orochimaru, they expected it to make the task difficult enough to give an equally matched opponent like Itachi an advantage, but in a few moments, he already figured out how to mix chakra with the new frequencies. A task that would have challenged even the most talented of Jonin was accomplished in a matter of seconds. Takuma neutralized the pressure and managed to stand up. His mind raced with thoughts of what they were going to do next, now that their plan had been disrupted, when he felt an intense dread grip his heart, and he turned to the source of the feeling. Itachi finished forming the last hand seal. He didn't draw the fire-natured chakra to his lungs, instead, he sent it all into a single, microscopic point at the tip of his fingers. The air around his hand began to hum as a tiny, pulsating spark appeared at his fingertips. It was a dull, blue-white light whose glow was reflected by the lingering steam in the area. There was no heat haze, no roar of flames, just a high-pitched frequency, giving a hint of the temperature of the point of chakra compressed beyond anything Takuma was remotely capable of. Takuma recalled the short conversation that he had with Itachi just prior to all of this. "Captain, do you have something that would only harm the target? I fear that if you use A-rank ninjutsu, the assault squad guys in the vicinity would be in mortal danger. They won't have the time to escape. We need something that won't kill them not." They had to be in a relatively close distance while casting the joint barrier ninjutsu. "Yes, I have something like that." Takuma realized his error. When Itachi had told him that he had something suitable, Takuma assumed that it was going to be a B-rank ninjutsu. It was because he had only seen A-rank ninjutsu causing widespread destruction and heard the stories of how they were used to wipe out companies of shinobi. An image of A-rank ninjutsu had formed in his mind. It was an image of A-rank techniques being area of effect weapons that dealt damage to an area instead of a target. But if there were ninjutsu of D-, C-, and B-rank that could target a single person, then there was no reason to believe that A-rank wouldn't have similar options. Uchiha Itachi was casting his second A-rank ninjutsu of the day. Chapter 497. Orochimaru realized that faster than others, as he released the physical expression of chakra and forgot all about getting the barrier jutsu off him. Instead, he bit both of his thumbs to draw blood and weaved an unfairly short series of hand seals before slamming his palms on the cracked earth with a look of utter focus. Summoning jutsu, triple Rashomon. The ground itself buckled in protest. With a sound like the grinding of tectonic plates, 3 colossal, ironclad gates erupted from the base of the artificial pond, one after another. Each gate was a masterpiece of intimidating defense, adorned with monstrous, horn faces and thick sealing chains. Fire release, solar nucleus needle. Itachi simply pointed. The blue-white spark elongated into a needle-thin beam of pure plasma and formed a line of white light across the battlefield as it traveled nearly instantly. The beam of plasma didn't cause an explosion, it simply melted a perfectly circular hole straight through the monstrous first gate as though it offered no resistance. However, the Rashomon gates were still the first Hokage's legendary defense. The needle beam pierced the second gate, but it turned from blue to orange as the gate reduced the jutsu's power. The third gate couldn't stop the beam either and was forced open, though not without resistance. The beam, the thickness of a needle, was suddenly dispersed into a pillar of intense fiery energy the size of a tree. The jutsu's power came from injecting an A-rank ninjutsu's worth of chakra directly into a singular target and burning them from the inside while they were helpless in the face of the foreign, hostile chakra. Death was a foretold outcome once it entered the body. However, even if the energy was dispersed, it remained a dreadful A-rank ninjutsu that drowned the target in extremely intense and potent fire-natured chakra. The pillar-like beam vaporized everything that fell inside its diameter, carving a tunnel into the ground for several meters. However, the man who should have been a burnt corpse was still standing. A wet, rattling sound emerged from behind the third gate. Orochimaru became visible in the shadow of the iron, his entire body charred, but his right shoulder a hollow ruin where the needle beam had caused the most damage. The wound was horrifying, a cauterized crater that had been nearly vaporized to the bone. Any other shinobi, perhaps even a Kage, would have been in a state of medical shock, their nervous systems shutting down from the trauma. But Orochimaru didn't fall. Instead, his body began to shudder with sickening undulations. Cuckoo, cuckoo ha 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 ha. The laughter tore his throat, punctuated by a spray of black bile. He was gravely injured. Beneath the scorched skin, something was moving. Hundreds of tiny, pale white vipers began to writhe within the cavity of his ribs, their bodies weaving together like living stitches. They filled the hole, acting as a makeshift circulatory system, pumping a dark ichor through his veins. The charred edges of wounds across his body began to bubble and peel away, revealing raw, pink tissue that was already hardening into scales. In their locations, Hopper and his squad stood frozen, their sandals sinking into the cooling mud. Koi's hands trembled as he held the chain. As an Irionin, he knew much about the human body. Even if the solar needle had to punch through 3 Rashomon, and even if its power was reduced and dispersed, no one was supposed to survive what did get through. He couldn't wrap his head around what he was seeing. It didn't work, he whispered, the words tasting like ash. Across the crater, Itachi leaned against the wall, heaving for air with a rasp in his throat. Using 2 A-rank ninjutsu so close to each other was tough on anyone's body. On top of that, he had used the Susanoo the day before. The strain of it was catching up to his young and immature body. Continuing to fight at the required level itself might cause his body to break down. Itachi stood up straight regardless. He didn't care about any of that and was going to fight until he died. Orochimaru looked through the gates at Itachi, his yellow, snake-like eyes wide with a terrifying, drug-like euphoria. Is this your best? A needle prick? Despite the thoughts swirling in his head, Takuma looked above Orochimaru. The plan wasn't over. As Orochimaru was cackling, a black snake hammered out of the ground near his feet and sank its fangs, the size of chef's knives, into Orochimaru's good shoulder and then wrapped its long body around him, restricting him tightly. At the same moment, Anko descended right in front of him with a look of pure hatred burning in her eyes. She finished her last hand seals the moment her feet touched the ground and then stabbed a point below his chest. "Dear Anko, you have grown so much," Orochimaru said with an almost sweet tone. He raised his good hand and softly brushed her cheek. She didn't stop him, but when his finger lingered down towards her shoulder, she slapped it away. He chuckled and continued, "You have grown strong as well. Your chakra has got stronger. You're almost there, aren't you, my dear student? Just one more step and you'll be on this side. You were always so talented." Yes, you were. Though his gaze seemed nostalgic, there was an unsettling feel to it that made Anko grit her teeth. "But I must say I'm disappointed." "Venom? On me?" He looked at the snake's maw covering his shoulder and felt pangs of pain as the fangs dug into his flesh. "You should know better than anyone else that poisons and venoms don't work on me, or on you. I made sure of that before I left. That's how much I cared about you." Anko knew he was trying to get a rise out of her and kept her temper down. Instead, she chuckled. "That arrogance and pride of yours have always been your faults. It's going to be your death. I found this one specially for you." Orochimaru narrowed his eyes and was about to say something when he heard a rattle, and his eyes widened in a sudden realization. He looked at the snake, its black color, the shape of its scales, and the distinct rattle on its tail, and recalled a rare variety of serpent that lived in the Ryuchi cave. For the longest time, he didn't know that the breed existed, and when he did become aware, it just existed in the back of his head. He didn't even know that it was a venomous kind because the snake's venom did no harm, on its own, that is. But when the venom was introduced to the fire-natured chakra, it turned into one of the most corrosive substances known to the world. It caused damage everywhere, carried by the blood through every corner of the body. A malicious grin broke out on Anko's face. She saw the look of realization on his face that he had allowed the venom to spread throughout his body as he talked to Anko, and that there was a sunbond stuck in his chest. "Fuck you," she snarled. Orochimaru roared as an immense amount of chakra was pumped directly into his body, and the snake restricted his body. However, he was faster than Anko and weaved single-handed hand seals. Anko screamed as her shoulder exploded in pain and the curse mark began to expand. However, rather than collapsing or taking a step back, she yelled louder and pushed more chakra into his body with more ferocity. Orochimaru's eyes widened when he felt the curse mark he had left on her bump against a seal, and instead of pushing forward, it recoiled in fear and even shrank back. He instantly recognized who had put that seal there by the chakra coming from it. It was the powerful chakra of the third Hokage, his former master. "Curse you, damned old man!" Orochimaru yelled as the inert venom turned corrosive. Every organ from the lungs to the kidneys burned. His internal organs, which were already in a precarious condition from the repeated moldings and getting hit by multiple A-rank ninjutsu, began to fail altogether. Black smoke began to rise from his body as the corrosive substance began to open holes in his body. Takuma, standing at a distance, heard the scream, saw the black smoke, and knew that the plan was working. Anko was arguably doing as much damage as the A-rank ninjutsu had done to him. And just at the right time, he heard Kawamochi's voice in his head. "He's there. Everyone, clear out." Others heard her voice as well because the assault squad immediately dropped their barrier ninjutsu and sprinted away from the crater in different directions. Itachi vanished from his spot with a body flicker. Takuma was also going to run, but he stopped when he heard Anko. "Just die, you monster." Anko yelled, releasing all of her pent-up feelings that had built up over the years. She wasn't moving away from Orochimaru as planned. Takuma clicked his tongue and turned around to flash to her with a body flicker. He picked her up on his shoulder without any communication and got her elbow smashed into the side of his head, which kind of helped with the fear of being so close to Orochimaru, before flashing away again and running as hard as possible to clear out of the blast zone. Orochimaru, through his pain, suddenly felt a foreign chakra in his body. It wasn't Anko's violent chakra. This chakra was trying to hide and doing everything in its power not to get caught in the chaos, wreaking havoc in his body. It only wanted to complete its job. It was the chakra of that boy who had just whisked Anko away. The boy with the augmentation. However, unlike that crude thing, this was smart. He was under a Jinjutsu. Straight-faced. As Itachi ran away, he looked up at the darkened sky and the shadow that it cast over everything. He looked over his shoulder as the clearing disappeared from his vision and recalled the conversation he had with Takuma as he was explaining the plan. We are going to cast 2 Jinjutsu on Orochimaru. I'll go first, and then you'll cast a second on top of that. We'd need to coordinate it well because it doesn't work if we slip up with our timing, Takuma said. Are you sure this is going to work? He has the Sharingan, Itachi said, feeling a complex jumble of negative feelings. Even without his eyes, he's skilled enough to see through Jinjutsu, and when you add the Sharingan, it'll be hard. Not if we don't give him a chance to figure it out. The plan's crux was not to give Orochimaru any space or time. They had to keep him busy enough that he didn't notice the ninjutsu. It was to start with Takuma's Water Dragon Missile Jutsu that would allow the 2 Jinjutsu to be set up. Orochimaru would be on the lookout for Itachi's Jinjutsu, but less so from someone else. And to ensure he didn't notice, they had to keep up the pressure. Itachi's Jinjutsu would allow Takuma's clone to get close to getting a hit, which would then allow the assault squad to lay down their barrier ninjutsu that would give time for Itachi to prepare his ninjutsu, which was to do enough damage to allow Anko to get in close for her own attack. All of that was to ensure that Takuma's Jinjutsu wasn't found out until the very end for the final surprise attack. As for what was hiding behind that Jinjutsu? Straight-faced. Even though his 5 senses weren't giving him anything out of the ordinary, Orochimaru's chakra sense was telling him that he was in danger. It was a sunny day with a soft sprinkle of clouds, a perfect day to be outside. He thought back to the weather before the fight and recalled the breeze that was cool to the touch. And yet, when he blinked, that scene disappeared, blocked by the gigantic figure that cast a shadow that blanketed everything around him. The light had gone from the bright afternoon to the late evening, and it would have been complete darkness. Orochimaru looked up, his reconstructed snake flesh quivering, and high above, breaking through the veil of steam and ash, was a godlike giant. Akimichi Choza had transitioned from a man to a mountain. His clan's super multi-sized jutsu had pushed his physical form to its absolute limit, his armor plates now the size of city gates, his red hair whipping like a forest fire in the high-altitude winds. Because of their huge size, any physical attack they made was extremely powerful and covered a wide area. The drastic increase in size put a great strain on the user's body, but in return, it granted tremendous power. Akimichi Choza had made a name for himself outside the Inoshikacho by using the jutsu in the Third Shinobi World War to dominate and win every battle he was ever a part of. He was truly the Hidden Leaf's undefeated giant. And yet, the strongest Akimichi was coming right down at him with an A-rank ninjutsu. The air around his massive form began to hum with a resonant, golden frequency. This was the pinnacle of yang release, the art of breathing life into form. Yang release, hand of the benevolent god. A shimmering, celestial light erupted from Choza's downturned palm. It wasn't a flame or a beam, it was a solidified construct of pure, golden chakra that mirrored the shape of his hand, cast in golden sun, growing until it spanned beyond the width of the entire clearing by the raw vitality of the Akimichi clan. The sheer mass of the jutsu began to compress the atmosphere. The air was hammered downwards. Below, everything began to crack and pulverize before the palm even made contact. There was no escape, you couldn't outrun the sky when it decided to fall. There was no way to avoid this without getting hit. Escaping was going to be an utter pain, the recovery itself felt like an incoming chore, but perhaps this was the time to make some adjustments to the body. I never like you, Orochimaru muttered, with resignation. This was going to hurt. The golden palm struck. Chapter 498. Takuma's chest hurt from the hammering pace of his heart. He gripped Anko so hard that she cried in pain, but he wasn't listening. All of his being was consumed by the shadow that grew overhead, casting its vast darkness over the land. His head told him not to look and to only focus on getting as far as possible, but his heart made him look up. The golden light looked majestic, divine even. But in that moment, Takuma perhaps understood what those with megalophobia, the fear of large things, felt, and he pushed himself faster than he thought he was capable of. As it reached its peak size, a vigorous gold shimmer replaced the dark shadows. It was truly a sight to behold, and if he wasn't trying to avoid being crushed, he would have stopped to take in the memory of a lifetime. Though he knew it was coming, escaping it wasn't any easier. As he headed towards the gap between the index and thumb, tempest winds hit from behind, throwing him forward. He lost control of his body for a few seconds while hugging Anko close as they crashed into the ground a couple of times, but just as he managed to regain control, an opposing wind slammed him from the front. The palm was creating a localized, artificial storm that uprooted trees and pulverized bedrock. With no way to oppose the forces of nature, they were pulled up into the air and deeper into the canopy of the descending palm. Anko pulled her arms free from the protective embrace and signed a short set of hand seals. Flames burst from her palms in the form of whips. Takuma squeezed his eyes shut in anticipation of the burning pain when one of them wrapped around him, recalling their spars, only to feel a gentle warmth. The other whip snapped around the jagged stump of a snap tree before reeling back to the ground. Their positions switched. Takuma was now being carried on Anko's back. As she touched the ground, she finished a second set of hand seals, and the ground erupted below her feet. Earth release, earth flow wave. The ground buckled under her feet before erupting into a jagged wave that flowed out of the giant palm's reach. With Anko racing on it, an increasingly intense pressure descended over them. Takuma had to grit his teeth to keep himself from shaking as he felt the deadly force inching closer. Her control of the earth wave was just as exquisite as it was fast. She whisked them away as the palm came closer and closer until the sky finally became visible over their heads, which was when she cast her third ninjutsu and jumped off the wave higher into the sky. A gust of wind surrounded them, keeping them afloat as the palm finally struck the ground, decimating everything beneath with no distinction, leaving only a colossal scar on the terrain as though from the hand of a god. And then a Kimichi Chozo landed on the ground, triggering a second series of earthquakes. The shockwave hit the duo first, and then the exploding debris. The jutsu gave out soon after, and they went plummeting to the ground. Takuma slammed his hands on the ground and raised a curved dome with earth release, earthen dome around them to protect them from the rubble being blasted everywhere. "Are you hurt anywhere, Chunin Anko?" Takuma asked with one hand on the dome and the other on her shoulder. Her fire whip was still wrapped around him, but it had grown thin, dim, and room temperature, casting 3 ninjutsu in quick succession so soon after the heavy jutsu she had used on Orochimaru, all in a high-stress situation, was going to be tough on anyone. The earth suddenly split underneath them, splitting the dome in half as well. Anko pushed herself and Takuma behind the larger section of the dome, which was suddenly assaulted by a large boulder, but remained standing. "Chunin Anko, is it?" she said with the tired expression of someone who had a long day behind her. "So, you are in the ANBU now?" "Pardon?" Takuma asked, his heart skipping a beat. Did his mask break? That wasn't the case. Then how? No use changing your voice now. You already let it slip before. Takuma opened his mouth, then closed it. It was very much possible that he had forgotten to modulate his voice with chakra during the stressful situation before. Normally, it wouldn't matter unless someone was intimately familiar with his voice to the point they could recognize it through the mask's natural muffle, which was exactly the case with Anko. Nothing to say? You aren't going to deny it now after all of this, are you? Anko reached for his mask, causing him to instinctively grab her wrist. They stared at each other for a silent moment before he eased his grip and let her remove his mask. Right. There you are. They stared at each other's faces in a situation neither of them had planned. Your energy imbalance was improving, why is it regressing now? she said with a small smile as she gently rested her hand on his face. That's the first thing you say? Takuma felt the tension drain from his body even though he could feel the ground shaking beneath him and hear the sounds of battle in the distance. Was it because she was nearby that he felt safe, knowing that he could trust his back to her? Or was it because another one of his loved ones knew about one of his secrets, and that lifted a burden? Perhaps it was both. I regret it, he said. Regret what? Telling you that I would help you kill the snake bastard. If I knew this was going to happen, I would have told you to aim for Hokage as the condition for my help. Jonin is too easy for what I was offering. Well, I would make an amazing Hokage. Anko broke into short laughter before despondency took over, with a hint of darkness swirling in her eyes. I fear he isn't dead. The words seemed to be difficult for her. That despite all that we did, it wasn't enough and that he will still survive through this. Takuma didn't say anything immediately. He, too, didn't think that Orochimaru was dead. If only things could be so easy. That doesn't mean what we did was useless. We now have the proof that he isn't unkillable. If we hit him intentionally rather than running into him incidentally, we can definitely kill him, Takuma said, thinking that an opportunity to do that would come soon when Orochimaru would willingly step into the Hidden Leaf Village. Anko nodded, and though she looked like she wanted to say something, she chose not to speak from fatigue. How are you feeling? She asked. Sweaty, grimy, exhausted. Takuma wanted to go home, but the battles were still ongoing. He wondered if Itachi would run after Danzo and if he had it in him to follow him and contribute. He had used a significant amount of chakra, and his body felt sluggish, which wasn't a good sign. Not that. You looked like you recognized him, too, Anko said. Suddenly, the thing he had put aside came rushing out. His chin trembled, and his hand went to his face, squeezing his brows and eyes in hopes that somehow it would stop the tears from trickling. Anko put a hand on his shoulder and let him get it out. The problem was that he had already grieved and come to terms with Gookie's death. All of that was destroyed today. He didn't know how to feel about it, just that it felt absolutely terrible. What was he supposed to say to others in the narcotics task force and the people who were there at the farm raid? He doubted that the Hidden Leaf would make Orochimaru's new appearance public because that would mean opening a can of worms that the village would rather not show to outsiders. Takuma apologized to her as he calmed down, and both of them got out from the cover of the dome. The terrain had stabilized alongside the destructive chaos. The lingering steam itself had been completely cleared because of the golden palm, fully revealing the carnage the shinobi had inflicted on nature. It was utterly terrible. So, when did you become a mask? After we returned from the war. Right after you extorted the ANBU out of information? Apparently they like that kind of thing. That can't be true. Frankly, I knew you were in the ANBU. Huh? Why are you making shit up? I'm not. You didn't think it was weird that you somehow managed to find the root agent that killed Riku, much less kill him, and then show up right after the ANBU raised the security level in the village and were kicking down doors everywhere? Ah. Thinking back on it, he didn't really do anything to hide his involvement. That was stupid of me. Or maybe you just wanted me to know, Anko said with a wink. Takuma gazed at her as he mulled the statement, realizing he didn't know if it was true or not. His attention was broken by a voice in his head. We're moving. They're saying it's safe to gather. Straight-faced. Akimichi Choza, the size of a mountain, breathed out to calm down the rampaging chakra in his body while looking down at what he had done with a frown. It never felt good using an A-rank ninjutsu. Sometimes, he felt scared of his ability to inflict such terrible harm on the world. It didn't feel like a power any one person should possess, and yet there were others, far too many in his opinion, in the village and abroad who could do similar things. Status, he yelled internally, his voice coming out harsher than he meant to. The combination of super multi-sized jutsu and hand of the benevolent god wasn't easy to use in his youth, and he had only grown older since then. And it wasn't like one could regularly train with an A-rank ninjutsu. It had been over 5 years since he had last used it, and that was in the middle of a desert with no one in sight stretching to the horizon, just so he would do minimal damage. Yet, he had killed far too much desert fauna. With such a large gap between uses, he often wondered if he even remembered how to use the jutsu. He had consulted the jutsu scroll before coming to the operation. He's alive, and rapidly fleeing. A frown marred Choza's face as the news that Orochimaru had survived was deeply upsetting, causing his anger to flare. He landed on the ground far more roughly than he intended and nearly slammed his staff down. Which direction? If he's in range, I'll kill. No, please stand down, Lord Choza. It's over. The words sobered him. He waited a couple more seconds to see if a second command would come before releasing the jutsu and felt a few seconds of the worst discomfort he had ever felt as his body returned from its giant stature to normal size, where he once again felt comfortable in his skin. The view of the scenery from his normal height was just as bad, as he could see the damage so much more up close, even if the bigger picture had disappeared, only from view, not memory. The plan worked, Choza said to himself, feeling surprised that it had gone without much problem. Keeping Orochimaru busy so he didn't notice a Jinjutsu cast by a Chunin just felt wrong on so many levels, especially with the knowledge that he had somehow gotten his hands on the Uchiha's Sharingan, but it had somehow worked. Is anyone injured? If so, tell me. I'll go fetch them, he informed Kawamochi while reminding himself to find the identity of the ANBU who had made the plan and cast the Jinjutsu on Orochimaru. It wasn't going to be that difficult, it would just take using his connections and plying them with favors and gifts to get the information, but it seemed worth it. Chapter 499, he's still going to be able to use it, right? Takuma gazed at Koei healing Yatso a few paces from the group. Even though it hadn't been that long since the injury, every minute was critical on the field, away from proper medical facilities. Koei is going to do whatever he can here and then move him to the supply base down at the village, Hopper said, looking over at his subordinates. He probably won't face any problems in daily life, but there might be lasting damage that could hinder his life as a shinobi. The reduced dexterity and movement alone will interfere with hand seals. Takuma pursed his lips. That in itself wasn't enough to end Yatso's career, but it posed a great setback and served as a hindrance every step of the way. The mental burden of that knowledge in itself was going to be heavy. He sighed and then turned his gaze to Anko, resting against a tree. She had used a considerable amount of chakra in her attack against Orochimaru. Speaking of others who had used a lot of chakra, Takuma looked at the two Jonin who had used the A-rank ninjutsu. Are you planning to go after Guy and Kakashi? Choza asked. I have confirmed that everyone is fine. I might still make it in time, Itachi replied, but he didn't look well, which was expected after using two A-rank ninjutsu so close to each other. The chakra expenditure and the stress on the body were bound to have their effects on his young body. You stay put. I'll go instead, Choza said, gently resting his big hand on Itachi's. But you have done enough. You're still young, you'll get more opportunities to fight in the future. Leave something for the old men like us, Choza said with a smile. Itachi wanted to argue, but Choza refused to listen and managed to convince him to stay put. I'd like to come with you, Lord Choza, Takuma said the moment he got the chance. Arisu, Kamiko, Turn, and Aquila were part of the group chasing Danzo. He had to go there to make sure his friends and subordinates were safe. The other assault squad members also voiced their wish to join him. They wanted to go support their captain. No, everyone here has done enough. I will go alone. I don't want to look out for a group of tired Chunin, and if I match my speed with yours, I'll be too late. Even though he wasn't their commanding officer, Choza nevertheless sternly ordered them to stay put and then vanished with the body flicker without giving them a chance to respond. Stay put, Itachi sighed. But, Captain, we're beaten up, tired, and will sooner create problems before we end up being helpful. Believe in our Jonin and trust them to bring the traitor to justice. Despite his words, Itachi didn't look happy about the situation. Putting aside everyone else, It was a humble thing for Itachi to say that, and yet, there was truth in those words. Even if he was a Jonin and an ANBU captain, he was only a 16-year-old with limited experience, whereas Chozo was a veteran of the Third Shinobi World War and well-versed in fighting alongside other Jonin from his experience as a third of the infamous Ino Shikacho trio. He would be able to help the group right from the get-go. Though none liked it, they settled down and immediately felt that it might have been a good decision to stay. Even if they had small roles, the stress of being on the periphery of a fight between two monster Jonin and facing someone like Orochimaru hit them like a train the moment they allowed themselves to relax. Takuma couldn't help but shake his leg in worry for his friends and subordinates. He tried to think positively. The one leading them into battle was Kakashi, someone with a reputation as a great tactical mind, someone who wouldn't get his subordinates killed with harebrained orders. Though he couldn't go himself, he had taken advantage of his opportunity to communicate with Kawamochi and send a message to the chasing party, hoping that it would ensure Risu and Kamiko remained safe. "You did well," Itachi said as he came to lean against the same tree as Takuma. It was only because everyone played their roles exceptionally. Learn to take a compliment. I'll work on it. Things could have progressed in a completely different direction. I don't believe he would have retreated if Lord Choza had entered the battle normally. Orochimaru wasn't a man who would retreat just because he was facing two Jonin, even if they were particularly strong. It was only because we injured him so severely in a short amount of time that he decided to flee. Lord Choza was amazing, wasn't he? Takuma looked up at the sky. Made me want to do something like that one day. He's a great shinobi and a tremendous man. Takuma agreed. There were many great shinobi who were terrible people. They had just fought one and had come to kill another one. How someone treated others said a lot, and if Masaki's treatment in the Akimichi clan was anything to go by, he was a truly great man because a place's culture flowed down from the top, especially in shinobi clans who considered themselves better than the rest. Mother is going to be proud and elated, Itachi chuckled. Takuma couldn't help but smile. Even though it was a collective victory, and he couldn't have done it without their help, he had successfully snared a Sannin in his Jinjutsu. Am I even allowed to say anything to her? Most definitely not. Knowing her, she'd guess we were without us having to say anything. There was no hiding what they had faced today. A lot of it would be confidential, but Orochimaru's presence here couldn't be hidden. They had learned much shocking information today, each one of them dire enough on its own. Even if it wasn't a surprise, the news of Orochimaru and Danzo would ring alarms and raise questions about whether they were working with other rogues or enemies of the state. Then there was the finding that the Snake Sannin had created a jutsu allowing him to possess others, a ninjutsu that neither Byakugan nor Sharingan could see through. And finally, Orochimaru had used that ninjutsu to take over an Uchiha, one previously thought to be dead. Just the fact that the Uchiha clan had buried a decoy was going to get a lot of people in the clan in grave trouble. This is going to cause chaos back home once we return, Takuma said. At the end of the day, a known terror is better than an unknown one, Itachi replied. We can at least prepare for something we know exists. Precisely. Takuma felt weary about the commotion he would have to deal with at home because of this. People responsible for keeping track of Orochimaru's movement and activities would come out of the woodwork to question him about every single detail of what had happened. He didn't want to go through any of it. We still lost a man. Takuma groaned, recalling the gruesome death of the assault squad member. Why even do that? He ignored the rest of us until we barged in with the plan. A provocation, Itachi said with a bad taste in his mouth. He likely imagined that a death would force me to take the fight seriously. He had a reputation of being a master of Jinjutsu, even among the Uchiha clan. He was considered a primarily Jinjutsu-oriented user, because he preferred to deal with situations through illusions. He did that because they were often the least violent option, perfect for someone who didn't enjoy fighting or violence. Orochimaru wanted to fight properly right from the get-go, so he could enjoy himself to the fullest before a Leaf Jonin showed up, which was highly likely to happen given the number of them participating in the operation. Did someone manage to get something off the body? Itachi asked. The death seal had already burned the operative's body, but even if that wasn't the case, the corpse would have disappeared from the sheer destruction the Jonin had caused. I don't think so. They'll have to find something from his locker. It was a tradition that if a shinobi's body couldn't be returned to their family, something personal on their body at the time of their death was kept as a remembrance. Many shinobi, even ANB Yunin, carried personal items on their bodies that could be recognized by their loved ones for that very reason. Takuma hung his head, thinking that maybe he should also carry something like that. He was brought out of his thoughts when he saw Itachi standing and walking to the tree that Anko was sitting against. Everyone watched as he squatted right in front of her, surprising even her. You disobeyed orders, Chunin Anko. You put the shinobi under your command at risk. Please reflect on your actions today and the consequences they might have, Itachi said as ANBU Captain Weasel. Anko predictably felt worse because it was true and hung her head in shame. But it's also true that we couldn't have done it without you. You were exceptional out there, which is precisely why you need to reflect on your actions. Yes, sir. I understand. I apologize and will take responsibility, Anko said, unable to meet anyone's eyes. However, Itachi wasn't done and continued, I managed to catch what Orochimaru said to you. Anko looked up at him with confusion and a shade of caution, her body showing signs of pulling up her guard. In her experience, nothing good came when she and her former master were mentioned in the same sentence. And surprisingly enough, I agree with him. You're only a step away. Pardon? Anko's eyes widened. And if you manage to cross over and evolve your understanding of chakra, it's the most difficult step. Many have tried and failed despite their talent, but if you do cross the line, you'll eventually be honored as a proud Jonin of the Hidden Leaf. However, understand that a position doesn't only represent power, it also carries responsibility more than anyone expects. You can't act on your emotions as you did today. Each decision of yours will carry more weight than ever. Remember that and grow to be worthy of that position. I'm looking forward to it. Takuma's lips parted in surprise. Anko sat frozen as though struck by a paralysis jutsu before her shoulders rose from a sharp, ragged breath she tried to hide. She didn't turn her face, but the sunlight caught the side of her face, revealing a flicker of something raw and unshielded in her eyes. It wasn't the look of an acidic retort she had ready to whip out, it was the look of someone who had just been handed something precious and was terrified of dropping it. That's what you end up saying, she said. Her eyes were bright, too bright, but her expression was set in a grim, new kind of focus. She didn't offer a grin of witty retort. She simply straightened her back. I'm not exactly responsibility material yet. But I'll try not to make people who bet on me look like complete idiots. Before he knew it, Takuma had a big grin stretched on his face behind his mask. It was as though everything that had happened today didn't exist. He just stared at her, taking her in. Her squared shoulders and raised chin, so similar to her usual confidence and yet completely different. He didn't think he had ever seen her like this. He looked at Itachi, who brought about this change, and couldn't help but admire him. This was the way to motivate someone else. When compared to what he had done, it was completely different. Talent had nothing to do with it, he was simply something else entirely on every level, inspiring a kind of feeling that he couldn't describe. Chapter 500. The canopy acted like a jagged sieve, casting flickering shadows over the root agents as they navigated through the dense forest. Behind them, the roars of battle gradually faded into the rustle of trees. Itsuki, the Jonin leading the agents, looked over his shoulder as he leapt from one moss-slicked branch to another. A shrill whistle from him alerted his subordinates, their formation became sharper, and their hands drew closer to their weapons, ready to spring into battle. They continued to run as Itsuki scanned the dense greenery. Did you hear that? He asked. Hear what, sir? The agent to his left responded. Itsuki didn't respond. He tilted his head, his ears straining against the gentle winds that flowed between the leaves, and suddenly heard the faint sound of a wet branch snapping, followed by a rhythmic huffing that didn't seem to be human. A wild animal? With all the battles occurring, all the residents of the forest would be running away from the dangerous noise. Nothing, sir, the second agent replied. Sensory? Itsuki asked, his hand drifting towards the hilt of his short sword. In their situation, it was wise to treat even an innocent squirrel dropping an acorn with the seriousness of an ambush. The sensory nin responded in the negative, but then focused deeper to sharpen his chakra sense for another check, but a loud explosion ripped through the trees, causing a shower of leaves to flutter down. Through the canopy, everyone saw a gigantic dome of spinning hellish flames visible in the distance. Itsuki recognized it as coming from the direction planned for Lord Danzo's escape. He clenched his fist and swallowed nervously, thinking about the worst-case scenario. The last-minute decision to have Orochimaru as his guard was something he had vehemently opposed, but with the threat of Leaf's forces right outside, he wasn't given the chance to persuade Lord Danzo otherwise. He had no illusions about where Orochimaru's priorities, much less his loyalties, lay. He'd abandon and betray them the moment things got ugly. The only comfort, if one could call it that, was that there were a rare few in the world capable of making the Snake Sannin feel threatened. Itsuki shook the thoughts from his mind. His group was the first to leave and consisted of the fastest legs Root had to offer. His objective was clear: evade a fight altogether and put enough distance between them and the battle that even if the Hyuga's Byakugan could spot them, they would conclude that a meaningful chase and interception were infeasible. He was carrying a record of Root's organizational knowledge. The personnel ledgers of active sleeper agents, the orphanage pipelines, the financial web that supported their activities, the location of various safe houses, Root's communication protocols, and the vast amounts of information they had about diplomatic secrets, clan vulnerabilities, and intelligence on other villages, the leverage they used to move the world despite being a small organization. Their base had been stripped of that information, the evidence burned. They were realistic about what was going to happen. The Leaf forces outnumbered them, the total loss of lives was all but guaranteed, and with it, the destruction of knowledge in the agents' heads. If Root was to sprout again from scorched ground, they needed the essential information to be safe so it could be used to kickstart their regrowth. Lord Danzo had entrusted that key of revival to him to keep it safe and get it out of danger. "There's too much chakra in the air, sir," the sensory nin said with a hand over his forehead. It didn't matter because a moment later, a piercing yelp sounded in the east. Before Itsuki could formulate a command, a second bark answered from the west. Then another from the southwest. Barking. Howling. The frantic, heavy panting of large lungs. Within heartbeats, the Root group became aware that they were surrounded. The sounds weren't stationary, they were closing in with terrifying speed. The agents looked around, but the dense undergrowth masked the true numbers. The trees themselves made the sound into a maze of false echoes. Inuzuka, Itsuki muttered loud enough for his subordinates to hear. He also considered Hitaki Kakashi for a moment before scrapping the thought. "Form up! Back to back!" A trained team of Inuzuka was infamous for their battlefield efficiency. Their coordination was a perfect mix of human intellect and canine instinct, granting them an unsettling mix of sync and efficiency that allowed them to rip through enemies in a whirlwind of fur and steel without giving their enemies a chance to put up a defense. Who was it? Itsuki's mind raced as he tried to think of who was leading the team, because the leader could change how the team operated. His objective was to avoid the fight entirely. 9 o'clock, the sensory nin shouted. Itsuki jerked his head to the left as a gray blur flickered between the trunks. A sudden explosion of smoke and splinters followed, and before the snapped logs could fall through the smoke, a three-headed beast the size of a large building exploded forth in a rain of splinters and shredded needles as it tore through trunks as if they were dry twigs. The ground groaned under its weight as the monstrosity charged, its massive claws gouging the earth and 3 sets of fangs gnashing in a deep snarl. Itsuki didn't have the time to weave hand seals as the beast was already upon him. His heart lurched upon seeing something that big moving at such a high speed. The center head, a maw of obsidian gums and yellowed fangs, slammed into his chest before he could even trigger a last-second body flicker. He felt his ribs cave as he was driven backwards, his heels carving trenches in the dirt as he was pinned against an oak that snapped on impact. Suddenly, the view was nothing but snapping jaws. The left head lunged for his shoulder, its breath hot and raw. The right snapped at his leg with the force of a bear trap. Itsuki barely managed to avoid getting his limbs torn off and instantly ducked when the center head retreated to bite at him, snapping around the trunk, which exploded from the bestial bite force. If it had been his body, he would have been turned into minced meat. Itsuki rolled to the side, but the beast was so big that he was still within the left head's reach, which immediately snapped at him. He slid under it while drawing his short sword, a blade forged from chakra-conductive steel. With a desperate surge, he raked the blade across the beast's flank. The steel hit the gray fur with a screeching ring. The blade didn't disembowel. It didn't even draw a bead of blood. Not a single strand of fur fell from the body. The sword skipped off the hide, leaving nothing but a faint line of friction. Itsuki looked up to find 6 burning eyes of an Inuzuka Jonin. This wasn't the clumsy and uncontrolled power of a Chunin's human-beast transformation. The size of the beast and the toughness of the skin could only be possible by a master of the Inuzuka's imitation beast ninja arts, until there was no difference between man and beast other than the basic form. Before his mind could catch up to the Jonin's identity, he heard the screams of his men. Behind him, the forest had become a centrifuge of fur. 4 Ninkin, massive and silver-gray, were flying through his men as they launched into the Inuzuka clan's Fong passing Fong. 4 furious cyclones tore through various points in the canopy and undergrowth, and were upon the group before a single hand seal could be drawn. The rotations and momentum were so violent that one dog slammed into 3 agents without losing speed. The second dog bit an arm and ripped it right out of the socket as it rotated past the agent. The other 2 Ninkin bounced off each other and their targets, leaving behind rows of gashes from their sharpened claws. Before the agents managed to get their bearings, significant damage had been inflicted. The earth was gouged into deep trenches with jagged marks, the soil steaming from friction and chakra. Itsuki didn't have time to bark orders as a paw larger than his height swiped at him. He went flying across the air, but this time he was ready and regained control quickly midair and landed parallel to the ground, his legs on a trunk. His eyes went around the battlefield, where he noticed the 4 dogs. Inuzuka shinobi never sent their partners alone into the battle, they were always there right beside them. And right now, he couldn't see the shinobi, only the Ninkin. Maybe the Inuzuka shinobi had transformed them into their Ninkin, but the 4 dogs were distinct from each other, which wouldn't be the case if they were transformations. He looked at the 3-headed beast and then at the 4 dogs, and the realization struck. They weren't fighting a team of Inuzuka. They were fighting one man. Inuzuka Gaku, the unfailing hound. He wasn't given time to think as the 3-headed beast moved. Itsuki got ready to defend, weaving hand seals, but then the 4 Ninkin around the agents leapt away, and simultaneously, the beast went for the agents. It leapt into the air, curled into a ball, and then rolled at a ferocious speed as though chasing after its tail. The beast's rotational speed blurred it into a gray wheel as it hurtled towards the agents. Tail chasing Fong, Fong rotating Fong. The ultraviolent rotation tore through half the team, even though most of them managed to successfully put up impressive defenses, but the steel-like body, the weight, the speed, and whatever else Gaku might have put in ripped through them all and the trees afterwards without the slightest wobble. The moment the beast passed and the surviving agents were finding their footing, the 4 Ninkin seamlessly moved in before the blood even splattered on the ground and picked off 2 more agents. This was the threat of the Inuzuka, they operated with impeccable teamwork. Usually, it was with a shinobi and 1 or 2 Ninkin, and in rarer cases, a bigger team of Inuzuka shinobi. But this case was unique even among them all. Inuzuka Gaku, a Jonin on his own, worked with 6 Ninkin, 6 very strong Ninkin, a high number in the clan. When put against a Jonin-led team of Chunin who had years of experience working together on high-tension missions and a top-of-the-line success rate, Gaku and his Ninkin had beaten them soundly in a war game. Itsuki looked at the remaining agents and instantly made his decision. He ran away, choosing to abandon them without looking back. Gaku was known as the unfailing hound because once he had the scent, he never let his target go, even if he had to chase them down across borders. He had got in trouble for breaching into other countries during his pursuits, creating a lot of diplomatic tension between villages because no one liked a foreign Jonin in their lands. The only way to make sure to evade him was to avoid him altogether, which was more than difficult with his pack of ninkin. However, Itsuki's objective was to keep the information he was carrying safe. Fighting would not only keep him in place, but it would also prevent the Leaf from sending backup, which would further put him in danger. He was chosen for a reason, and that was because he could get the information out of reach. Additionally, he was currently uninjured and in his best condition to undergo a drawn-out chase. So, despite the reputation he was facing, he trusted his own ability. "Hold him back," he yelled to his remaining subordinates and ran. He didn't believe they would do much good, but anything was better than nothing. He heard loud laughter followed by a shout calling after him. "Yes, yes! Run! A hunt without a chase is just not fun. Run, my dear prey!" Itsuki looked back to see Inuzuka Gaku standing in a cloud of smoke with his two ninkin, reverting from beast to man, thereby proving his speculation of his enemy. He had a feral grin on his face with a look of pure thrill in his eyes as barks and growls mixed with screams behind him. Chapter 501, The midday sun was only growing harsher. The forest, which was usually a symphony of cicadas and rustling leaves, was choked with air smelling of scorched ozone, bitter tobacco, and the metallic tang of blood. Sarutobi Asuma stood in a small artificial clearing, his trench knives glowing with a sharpened edge of blue-white wind chakra. Across from him stood Shiso, his opponent. The root agent wore the standard mask and held a chakra-conducting chain that hummed with a silverish-white lightning chakra. Around them, the forest was in chaos. Some trees had been forcibly snapped and burned by the violent lightning chakra, while others were cut clean by the sharpness of the wind chakra. Their subordinates maintained their distance, remaining outside the zone of destruction. Both sides had suffered casualties despite trying to stay clear of the fallout. The larger Leaf Force tried to surround the smaller Root group but had been unsuccessful due to the Root Jonin's constant interruptions. They had been in a bitter clash until half a minute ago but now were looking to the sky through the opening in the canopy. A strong wind hit the area as an endless amount of vapor clouds swallowed a part of the forest in the distance. The Jonin knew that it could only be a clash of A-rank ninjutsu, and the Chunin and Jinin could guess that it was something far beyond their capabilities. The casualties on both sides already had them on edge, and the thought of being caught in collateral damage that they had no chance of avoiding scared them. Some gripped spiritual charms while others recited prayers as they helplessly watched the steam eat more and more of the forest like a hungry beast. Shiso took the opportunity to send the lightning-infused chain out like a thunderhead, shattering a nearby tree as if it were glass and then bouncing towards Asuma, who effortlessly parried it with the edge of his knife. The lightning tried to jump to his body, but the wind chakra rebuffed the charge. The attack jump-started the fight as the two Jonin went after each other faster than the rest of them could track, sending shockwaves as their chakra-conductive weapons clashed. Even if they wanted to do something, arcs of lightning left in the air by the black chain and the leftover wind cutters were dangerous enough to kill several. Though the Jonin remained the center of the battle, others weren't useless. Momo stood atop a high branch to the east of where the Jonin were duking it out. Below her, two teams of Jinin, 10 pale-faced shinobi of various ages, waited for her signal. They glanced up at her, at the Jonin, and even at the steam cloud in the distance, but her eyes remained fixed on the Jonin. The movements that were too fast for others, she could see them. She could understand that she had no direct place in that battle, but there were other things she could do. "Go!" she yelled. The Jinin below her couldn't engage. To move within 10 feet of a Jonin of any caliber was to court death, death by decapitation in this case. Instead, they followed Momo's orders and moved in a practiced yet tense formation around the periphery of the clearing destroyed by the Jonin. They launched high-tensile wire, crisscrossing the trees in a frantic fashion. Shiso's eyes flickered behind his mask. He saw the web they were weaving and shifted his weight to lunge at the nearest Jinin, a young boy stumbling with the spool, while throwing his chain at Asuma, who once again deflected it with ease, and at the same time, throwing one of his trench knives right at his face. The knife curved in the air, flying at its target from a blind spot. Shiso flicked his wrist, and the knife caught the chain. His eyes widened as the lightning disappeared from a few links, and the trench knife cut a partial notch into a chain link, not enough to weaken it, but enough for him to reconsider Asuma's skill with wind nature transformation. The young genin's relief was only momentary because Shiso didn't change his course. A single kick from the Jonin would be enough to kill the kid. The genin's face went pale and sweaty, he dropped the spool and went down, his trembling legs giving up. "No! Save me!" Before Shiso could reach the weak point in the scheme, he looked up. Not so easily. Momo was midair with her sword drawn, a pulsating glow started from the base of the blade and condensed at the tip. It was a B-rank Kenjutsu. His eyes shone in a semi-serious light when he felt chakra emanating from the blade. The girl was on the cusp of getting her foot in the door to understand chakra at a deeper level. The Kenjutsu wasn't going to kill him, but he couldn't ignore it. He switched his target from the genin to her. Regardless of how strong her ninjutsu could be, it wouldn't mean anything if she missed. He was going to dodge her thrust and then crush her throat. On the ground, Asuma weaved a short set of hand seals for a C-rank wind release ninjutsu. The jutsu was supposed to release wind twisters from the hand. Instead, he restricted the chakra, causing a barrier of twisting winds to cover his arms. Lightning release was weak against wind release, so he boldly traversed through the web, grabbed Shiso's chain, and pulled on it with his entire body. The root Jonin, about to reach Momo, was yanked back towards the ground. Instead of releasing the chain, he turned his back to Momo and grabbed the chain by both hands, pulling a section taut in front of him to prevent a trench knife covered in potent wind chakra from slashing his throat open. Shiso gritted his teeth to endure the pain as the girl's Kenjutsu pierced through his shoulder from behind. If that wasn't enough, he scanned his surroundings and saw that the entire area was now covered in a web of wire. Seeing their leader in a precarious situation, the 12 root Chunin began to move. The wires created a web that restricted movement but also facilitated the conduction of chakra. They could guess it was being set up to benefit Sarutobi Asuma, putting Shiso at a disadvantage. The two ways to get out of the disadvantage were to either dismantle the web or have Shiso escape it. The Hokage's son didn't seem to be keen about the latter, so their only option was to cut down the web. As they stepped forward, several fire bunnies burst out from the woods, leaping out from the canopy, hopping out from the trunk. An agent slashed the rabbit that jumped at him with his sword. It exploded, pushing him back a step. However, he was entirely uninjured. Before he could reassume his stance and balance, a gloved hand emerged from the dimming fire and punched him in the throat. The agent pushed down the rising panic and swung his sword blindly in an attempt to keep his assailant at bay, but the figure stepped in close, effortlessly avoiding the sword. He saw a pair of 3 Tomo Sharingan through the rapidly fading flames. The Uchiha Kunoichi raised a kunai that she immediately thrust towards his chest, and it would have pierced his heart if not for another agent deflecting it at the last moment. Enemy spotted, the second agent yelled a moment before 3 flame rabbits slammed into his face, killing him instantly. The root agents were quick to react and seamlessly restructured into trios and positioned themselves into a formation where each had their neighboring trios back just in time to face the horde of rabbits ready to immolate them. 2 of the agents managed to move in time to perform water release ninjutsu to douse a great majority of rabbits to avoid the second half of the flash that would have otherwise obstructed their vision. Status: the third agent of the trio that had encountered the Uchiha Kunoichi yelled to his teammates. He noticed that the first agent, the one who had avoided getting stabbed, had his right arm broken and twisted at a bizarre angle. However, before he could say anything, an agent from another trio raised his voice in alert. "Enemy!" For a moment, most of them froze when they turned to follow the agent's voice and caught a teenage Kunoichi standing right in the middle of their formation. She had slipped through in a moment of chaos when they all had their backs to the enemy. That short moment was enough as Izumi finished signing hand seals for the C-rank fire release ninjutsu, pushing double the amount of required chakra into it. The air between her and the agents blurred. Heat swelled moments before a powerful dome-shaped wave exploded outward, pushing them all away. Despite the extra chakra, it wasn't enough to injure or knock out any of the agents, though they were all sent flying several meters. Her head was on a swivel, while her body was in constant motion, taking in everything around. She pushed against the ground and all but teleported to the nearest agent, who was greatly affected by her jutsu. Her hands blurred into hand seals. The agent tried to retrieve his sword, but she kicked his hand in a way that forced his front to be exposed and threw a tag kunai right into his chest. Simultaneously, the jutsu she had completed triggered, lighting her legs on fire. Before the tag could explode, she disappeared. The agent died while the tag pushed his trio mates away with its explosion. Izumi appeared in front of another agent and kicked him in the chest. He managed to block the blow, but the fire chakra in her leg blasted outwards, swallowing his body whole. Fire release, devil legs. A C-rank ninjutsu and one of Izumi's staples. The jutsu augmented the destructive capacity of her kicks. It also remained active over an extended period of time until the allotted chakra ran out. However, after becoming a chunin, she had modified the jutsu so that she could use all the chakras sustaining it with a single kick, inflicting damage closer to B rank than a single-use C-rank ninjutsu. The only requirement was to train her legs to be able to endure the stress the modification put on her body. She smashed her elbow around into an agent in the head when he tried to grab a holdover. Another agent stepped in from behind, pasting an explosive tag on her. Izumi didn't see him or the tag, but she saw everyone else suddenly backing off. Her Sharingan scanned everything from their movements to body language to the tilt and angle of their heads, and that was enough for her to deduce that she had a paper tag on her back. She touched a random spot on her lower back, not bothering to find the tag, and sent a wave of fire chakra across her back, burning it into black ash. She immediately swung for the agent closest to her, and as he leaned in to avoid her punch, brought up her knee. In that moment, the agent recalled the Sharingan he had seen. Despite knowing that the Sharingan couldn't see the future, he couldn't help but wonder. The knee broke his nose, cracked his skull and pushed the chakra right into the body. In an instant, the agent's head caught on fire, and he was immediately dead without a scream. Izumi paid no attention to the dead man as she had three agents coming at her from all directions. Her Sharingan swiftly moved as she took in her assailants and paused for a split second before moving as though there weren't several blades whistling towards her body. To the utter surprise of the three agents, all their attacks missed by a hair's breadth. They looked up at her and saw her looking down at them with her crimson eyes, with nary an expression on her face. Izumi snapped her fingers, making the three agents feel steel chains constricting around them. Their bodies went stiff as they plummeted to the ground while they helplessly struggled against their bounds. It was only a couple of seconds before all three experienced agents realized they were under the influence of Jinjutsu and immediately disrupted and flushed out the foreign chakra. The strangulation of the chains disappeared, and yet they could faintly feel it on their skin. With the Jinjutsu shattered, Izumi was free to initiate a ninjutsu. The agents knew that as well. They immediately stood up, and all three decided to attack her, but it didn't matter because Izumi was already finished weaving hand seals. She only had enough time to go through hand seals for a D-rank ninjutsu, which wouldn't be enough to push three Chunin agents, and that's what they figured as well, thus their decision to attack her instead of pulling away. Unfortunately for them, every shinobi of the Uchiha clan was required to master a specific ninjutsu to be considered an adult. It was beaten into them, it was trained even if the shinobi didn't use it in combat. It was an Uchiha tradition. Fire release, Great Fireball Jutsu. Izumi pumped twice the amount of necessary chakra into the jutsu. Usually, it would result in a lot of chakra waste for increased power. However, in this case, she could convert chakra into power with absurd efficiency. A sphere of roaring, incandescent orange erupted from her lips, expanding until it scraped the ground. The three root agents, caught in midair, had nowhere to go. The fireball consumed them, slamming into the broken trees with a concussive boom. It left behind three scorched, skeletal husks that crumbled into ash before they even touched the vitrified mud. Only the blackened, jagged ends of their blades remained, half fused to the steaming ground. Izumi looked up at the agents surrounding her and their hands blurring into hand seals. They were ready to drown her in ninjutsu that would, without a doubt, kill her. She looked relaxed because, despite her confidence in her skill, she wouldn't charge into a formation of root agents alone. She was only the spearhead responsible for creating a dent in the armor of the enemy. The trees and the undergrowth rustled violently as 10 Chunin and 30 Jinin emerged from the places they were hiding and descended upon the root agents' open backs. Chapter 502. Oh, good job there, Asuma whistled, impressed, as Momo's sword beam pierced Shiso's shoulder. She was his cousin's student, and he had trained her well. Allowing her to organize the troops and implement battle tactics was the right decision, even if Asuma had only agreed to lessen his workload. He gazed at the trap web of wires. It was among the suggestions he had given her back at the village, and she had procured the equipment and now successfully set it up by commanding the people she had met for the first time. There was nothing he liked more than delegating work and having it turn out well. He was planning to take it easy, leaving all the fighting to the mad dog, thirsty for battle. Then, Gaku had split up from the group, going after another target on his own, and left him to deal with a Jonin. Shiso immediately got up, blood staining his shoulder. His figure blurred as he shot towards his subordinates, who were currently being butchered. Asuma couldn't allow him to escape and grabbed the wire nearest to him after weaving a short set of hand seals. The wire wasn't made of a chakra-conductive metal, but it was strong and well made by a skilled craftsman. It groaned under the strain of a Jonin's chakra coursing through it but held. 3 lengths of wire, crossing each other to form a triangle, shone a dull green before rapid winds howled forth. Shiso's eyes widened as a triangular wind wall consolidated right in front of him. He couldn't change his direction, nor could he stop himself. He could only cross his arms as he slammed into the wall that couldn't have been any more solid and was thrown to the ground. "I need a cigarette," Asuma sighed. He pulled on an invisible chakra thread tied around his middle finger, and summoned his trench knife into his hand. Asuma recharged the wind chakra in the blade to a sharpened point and hurled it at Shiso's blind spot. The rude Jonin didn't see it coming until it was too late but, to his credit, moved out of the way. The blade split the top of his ear rather than plunging into his nape as it had before. "Ready!" Momo yelled, her voice straining. She had managed to land outside the web and was now commanding a dozen Chunin surrounding the wire web from 3 sides. All of them looked terrified as they stared at their downed enemy, but they followed the command despite being ready to flee at a moment's notice if the Jonin so much as twitched. "Go!" On Momo's command, the Chunin finished their various fire-release ninjutsu. Only 2 of the dozen knew B-rank techniques, while the other 10 shot C-rank ninjutsu, boosted to the best of their ability, flooding the wire web with intensely hot fire. Simultaneously, Asuma grabbed nearby wires in both hands. He watched the rolling flames, felt the fire-natured chakras spreading around him, and then, according to the plan, flooded the entire wire web with wind-natured chakra. Instantly, the blaze of fire flooding into the wire web screamed and exploded in volume. The Chunin, despite knowing it was coming, were taken aback as the fire they conjured reached temperatures they were simply unable to produce. Some had to leap back in a hurry to avoid being swallowed by the flames. Sparks of lightning shot out from within the inferno before the fire exploded from within, hitting the leaf shinobi around the wire web. The Chunin standing closest were all bathed in hot fire, while the genin behind them flinched away from the wisps. The empty space in the middle of the web revealed a slightly burned Shiso standing on scorched ground. He glared at Asuma with electric sparks shooting out of his body and readied his chain, charging it with more lightning through each rotation. Asuma dropped the cigarette he had lit from the jutsu's flame with a sigh, releasing the one drag he had managed to take. He flexed his fingers, and his trench knives returned to his hand and flooded them with wind chakras, increasing the effective length of the blade's cutting edge. The wires between them had turned molten from the intense heat and dripped down to the ground. The 2 opposing Jonin charged each other, closing the gap in an instant with Asuma's trench knife aimed at Shiso's throat. The weight at the end of the chain smashed into the blade from below, carving a deep furrow into the porcelain. It cracked in half, revealing a thin, diagonal line of blood across Shiso's now bare face. Despite the close call, Shiso's reaction was not to retreat. He leaned into the strike and grabbed the second arm that came down with the other knife. The wind chakra dug into his arm above his wrist, ripping the muscles and grinding into his bones. He gritted his teeth and tightened his grip. Shiso's lightning-release ninjutsu surged, flowing back from his chain into his arm and right into Asuma's body, who was thrown backwards. As Shiso landed, he wove hand seals with one of his hands critically injured, a sheer testament to willpower and pain tolerance. However, before he could complete his ninjutsu, a cloud of dark ash surged his way, completely covering him. Most strangely, the ash didn't spread out towards the leaf shinobi and remained concentrated around the target. Inside the ash cloud, Shiso recognized the ash to be chakra-infused gunpowder, and the moment he completed his lightning release ninjutsu, it would spark the ash, and the explosion would blow up in his face. However, he didn't need to worry about it because as the ash settled down, it neared the still-lit cigarette Asuma had thrown onto the ground. The little heat in the cigarette wouldn't have been enough to ignite the ash, but the residual heat from the previous fire release ninjutsu primed the ash, so when it came into contact with the cigarette, fire release, ash pile burning. A rod of lightning-natured chakra shot through the explosion the moment the ash detonated and crashed into a tree 20 meters away, setting fire to the neighboring trees. Lightning release, Thunder God's Fong. Asuma calmly got up from the ground. He had simply moved out of the way the moment he was done spewing out the ash to avoid whatever Shiso was going to throw at him. He readied his trench knives, frowning at the fires. At any moment, the root Jonin could break through the fire and attack him. He strained his ears as well, ready to move in case the enemy targeted his subordinates. He hoped that Momo had moved everyone away as per the protocol they had come up with. Move back, everyone. Look to the sky and make sure that you don't get hit. Asuma blinked when he heard Kawamochi's voice sound in his head and looked up at the cloudy sky. He narrowed his eyes at something in the air before the tension drained from his body. Instead of moving back, he remained standing and pulled out a cigarette. It's not like she's going to miss, he said. Might as well risk it. As Asuma predicted, Shiso did charge through the fire. Only, he didn't head for any leaf shinobi and single-mindedly focused on escape. He even rushed past some of his injured agents who could have benefited from his help, but he ignored them and thought solely about himself. In a dangerous situation, the priority of survival always lied with the Jonin. Standard agents could be trained again to fill Root's ranks, but the probability of training another Jonin was astronomically lower than training a Chunin. However, just as he cleared out from the battlefield and entered the untouched part of the forest, his body jolted in shock. Huh! Shiso looked down to see a rod of wind chakra embedded in his body, with the spurt of blood that leaked out of the wound turning into blood mist. His legs gave out, and he fell to his knees. The wind rod had come in from his back, gone through his spine, pierced his heart, and punctured a lung. The rod sticking out of his body was grinding the wound and his internal organs as the wind swirled inside his body. With his body growing cold and his sight dimming, Shiso looked around to see who had hit him, but there was no one around him, only to realize the entry angle of the rod and how it had come down at him from above. The angle was too steep for it to be from the Hokage's son or anyone close by unless they had purposefully created a high arc, which meant that the enemy was. None of that mattered, Shiso thought as he let himself fall to the ground. The sound of footsteps caused him to turn his head to the side to see Sarutobi Asuma coming his way. Shiso's body, strengthened by decades of training and his understanding of chakra, was keeping him alive, but it couldn't save him. Unless the best Irionin in the land were beside him at this moment, he knew that he was dead. Any last words? Asuma asked. It was a life of splendid service, Shiso managed, his voice wheezing from the punctured lung and blood pooling in his throat. Do you regret it? Never, Shiso wanted to reply, but as death approached, he looked back at his life, and for the first time, he wondered if there was something more to life than what he had lived. But as those thoughts surfaced, he pushed them down. He had lived his life without being resolute in his beliefs, he didn't want regrets as his life was coming to an end. No. And those would be his last words as Shiso closed his eyes and allowed his body to let go, with his enemy looking over him in his last moments. A few hundred meters away from them, Hyuga Utsu smoothed her sleeves. She raised her eyes in the direction she had released her long-range ninjutsu, and her Byakugan showed her target dead as though he were only a couple of paces away. She nodded, satisfied with the outcome. When she was told that Yamanaka Kawamochi was on the roster, she knew that her contribution would be via looking over the battlefield using her eyes and relaying the information to the Mindwalker. However, that didn't mean she couldn't try to kill at least one Jonin. Lord Hokage's youngest son seemed to be the one most likely not to mind her interference in his fight. And as she looked at Asuma raising two thumbs up to no one in particular, which could only mean it was for her, it seemed that he was more than happy to allow her to claim the target as her prey. She chuckled to herself. Lord Hokage is fortunate to have such talented and wise sons. Utsus turned her eye to another part of the battlefield to resume the duties she had been brought on to do. Chapter 503. As the Leaf forces fought against Root agents across the battlefield, a group was formed at the last moment for a special mission. Led by Tokubetsu Jonin Saika, the group of 6 carefully made their way across the chaotic battlefield to infiltrate the Root base situated inside a hill. The mission was to stop the handful of agents inside the base from destroying evidence. Hyuga Utsus had identified some men staying back while everyone else fled the base. They didn't know what was left behind in their hurry to flee, but it had to be of some value if required men to stay behind and take care of it. Jonin Kawamochi, Jonin Utsus, please guide us, Saika called out as they entered a long corridor lined with yellow light bulbs. The hill had been hollowed out and reinforced with the help of earth-release ninjutsu to form levels, halls, rooms, and a seemingly unending network of corridors. Time and speed were of the essence to save the evidence from being burned. Navigating the base on their own would take too much time, but with the all-seeing Byakugan guiding them, they could traverse the enemy's base as though it were their own home. The team rushed deeper into the hollowed hill until they reached a set of stairs where Saika received another set of instructions. "We need to split up," he said to the team. There were agents on the current level and on the one below them. They couldn't afford to deal with them one at a time if they wanted to save as much as possible. "Masaki, Duna, come with me. The rest of you clear this floor," he said, making a quick decision to split the team into 2. "Remember, you cannot kill them. Their bodies will burn." The team of 6 was assembled by pulling men from 4 larger Jonin-led groups. It was an all-Chunin team, and that included Saika, a Chunin-level combatant despite his rank. However, unknown to him, 2 Genin had slipped onto the team. "Masaki, I want you front and center," Saika said as they descended the stairs. "Understood," Masaki replied, clinking his knuckle dusters against each other. They entered the lower floor and didn't need Utsu's guidance to find the 2 agents present on the floor. They heard them moving around, talking to each other, and as the team closed in, they were hit by the strong smell of kerosene a couple of moments before their steps splashed the liquid accelerant all over the floor. They were planning to burn the entire place. Setting up explosives would have resulted in a cave-in, but that could be resolved by excavating the earth to regain access to the base. Setting fire to it all was the only reliable way to get rid of all evidence, with the accelerant speeding up the process before the Leaf could have any chance to stop it. One of the agents stepped out of the room with a can of kerosene in his hand. Masaki rushed forward before either side could react and smashed the agent's jaw with his glowing fists. The agent crashed through the wall just beside the door opening, painfully tumbling back into the room. The kerosene can dropped to the ground and splashed Masaki with the fuel as he jumped into the room with the agent. Hearing the noise, the second agent came from around the corner. He, too, held a red fuel can in his hand that he immediately dropped to take a lighter from his pocket without a care for his own life. This was a threat to the mission. However, Saika was ready and released a great volume of water in the form of a violent wave. Water release, wild water wave. Kerosene and water never made a good mix, but it worked splendidly when trying to stop someone from setting a fire. The wave of water filled the entire corridor like a flood, hitting the agent like a hammer and dousing the lighter he was holding before it could set off any fires. However, the threat wasn't over as the agent wasn't out of play. Duna remained calm as he finished signing hand seals. His shadow wriggled before a dark tendril rushed across the floor, merging into the second agent's shadow. Shadow manipulation jutsu, the Nara clan's hijitsu, completely arrested the agent's movements. Saika sprinted towards the second agent and knocked the man out. He shared a glance with Duna, who nodded, and only then did he release the unconscious agent. Duna stepped forward and glanced into the room with Masaki to see that the teenager had bloodied the agent to the point of unconsciousness. "Slap them with chakra suppression seals and tie them up," Saika ordered. On the floor above, the Soul Root agent was pouring kerosene into the corridor when he heard the sound of pouring from around the corner, as though someone was splashing kerosene onto the floors and walls. For a moment, he thought that it was one of his fellow agents who had come up to help him cover the floor and was about to call out to him. But then he heard the familiar clink of a lighter being flicked open, followed by the sound of the striker wheel sparking against the flint. A jolt of fear jumped in his chest at the rapidly spreading fire around the corner. The light from the fire cast a man's shadow on the wall, revealing the subject walking away, along with the sound of footsteps. "What are you doing?" The agent rushed towards the corner despite the spreading fire because it was the only route to the exit they were going to take to escape the underground base after setting it on fire. He hastily turned the corner, expecting to see the spreading fire along with one of his fellow agents, only to completely miss the Leaf Shinobi standing in the shadow of the other corner, directly behind. The shinobi smashed a blunt baton straight to his head, hard enough that he jerked over to the other wall, immediately knocking the lights out of him. In the last moment of consciousness, he felt a genjutsu he didn't even know he was under shatter. The fire disappeared as though it was never there, which it never was. Instead, a blonde teenager stood in front of him with hands joined in a hand seal. There was a serious expression on his charming face that relaxed as the agent slid down the wall, falling hard onto the kerosene-covered floor. The third shinobi rushed in and immediately began to apply shock suppression seals and cuffs. Nenro breathed an audible sigh of relief as he lowered his hands from the hand seals for the genjutsu. It was his idea to handle the situation in a calmer fashion by reducing the possibility of a drawn-out battle, which would be extremely risky even if they outnumbered the agent, given he could just start a fire, by trapping the agent in illusions. It was fortunate that his teammates agreed to it without an argument. "Are we sure there's only 3 of them?" one of the Leaf Shinobi asked. "I think we can trust Jonin Utsu's word on that," Nenro said, eyeing the unconscious agent just in case the man decided to suddenly wake up. "Let's get him out of here. I'll go check downstairs to see if they need support." Nenro ran back to the staircase only to see Masaki coming up with a root agent lying limp over his shoulder, with Duna similarly carrying another agent behind him. Saika, who was last in the row, looked up at Nenro and asked, "Is it done?" "Yes, sir." "Good. Okay, let's get out of here." "Sir, we should cut off the generator. We wouldn't want something to spark and set the whole thing on fire," Nenro said, pointing to the light bulbs on the ceiling. "Right. That's intelligent, Chunin Nenro," Saika said, his eyes lighting up in realization. Nenro and Masaki shared a look but didn't say anything. Masaki and Duna took the 3 unconscious root agents outside the base while the others ventured out to find the generator powering the base. They were soon contacted by Kawamochi when Utsu saw them running around the base and asked them what they were doing. After hearing their reply, Utsu gave them the generator's location, allowing them to shut down the power and exit the base. "That went well," Masaki whispered to Nenro as the group celebrated the successful mission while awaiting any further orders. "With this, we won't get in trouble, right?" "Definitely improves our chances," Nenro whispered back. "Though we should definitely clear the misunderstanding with Tokubetsu Jonin Saika before he finds out from someone else." "You do it." "Yes, I was about to suggest the same. You just stand behind looking apologetic." With that, the 2 Jinin stepped towards the Tokubetsu Jonin, who believed them to be Chunin. Turning back time to before any of the Leaf Jonin-led groups had clashed with any of Root's fleeing parties, Sarutobi Asuma received a mental communication from Kawamochi while he was contemplating the identity of the unknown Jonin. He looked around, but the person he wanted to delegate the task to was missing. "Where is Okubo Momo? Call her here." Soon after, Momo arrived by his side. "You called for me, sir?" she asked. "We need to send 2 Chunin for a special mission into the root base to stop them from destroying evidence. Choose 2 to send and then reassign their subordinates to other teams appropriately. Do not send any that don't have teams, and don't pick yourself," Asuma said, but when she didn't reply, he turned to look at her. "Chunin Momo?" Momo snapped out of her thoughts and replied clearly and confidently. "Yes, sir. I'll do it." Momo left his side to complete the order, but instead of going to the Chunin to tell them to report to the location for a special mission, she headed to where her own team was and pulled Nenro and Masaki aside. "I have an opportunity that might be very good for both of you." Momo explained the situation to them and then asked, "I know it's a risk, and I won't force it if you don't want to. Frankly, I don't have the authority. I think both of you are beyond Chunin material, you're already Chunin level. If you stay here, you'll get the same amount of credit as one of the 500 Genin participating here, which isn't bad, but if you participate in this special mission, the chances of you getting a promotion soon after this operation will rise very high." She couldn't tell what Masaki was thinking or if he was thinking of anything at all, but Nenro had a pensive expression. "This very well might come back to bite us," he said. "It's a great risk. How about this? I'll stick my neck out first. Jonin Asuma gave this task to me in very clear words to send Chunin. I'll take responsibility for it if you get into trouble, and you can claim that you didn't know about the Chunin requirement. He's a Jonin, he isn't going to get in trouble, so all of it will fall on my head." Her words surprised both of them, and they exchanged looks. "Why would you take this risk?" Nenro asked. "You know why. All of us are civilian-born shinobi." Both of them were well aware about the things she had been doing to support and connect civilian-born shinobi, and I think both of you have great potential. If this turns out to be a success, not only will it be great for your careers, but you could also help others up with you. If you're still leery on it, then forget this conversation ever happened. No hard feelings. "Sure, I'll go," Masaki said almost immediately with an excited look on his face. Momo had to admit that she was often surprised at how easily he made his decisions in life. Nenro, on the other hand, took some time before saying, "Well, they do say it's better to ask for forgiveness than to ask for permission. Let's do it." And that brought a smile to Momo's face. "Amazing. Now, go earn yourself some expedited promotions." Chapter 504. As the fights around the battlefield were just heating up, the earliest exchange was barreling towards its climax. Two enemy Jonin had already exchanged over 100 moves and the village Root had been using as its cover. Uchiha Sayuri's sword was smoldering with veins of fire glowing across the blade's surface. Root Jonin Rinji's rigid staff was actively emitting wisps of smoke across its length. Despite the length of their exchange, the destructive intensity was curiously restricted to the village square itself, which was set aflame, its stone foundation cracked under the intense heat. The ancient tree whose shade used to be the children's classroom and a gathering place for the community when the day turned cooler was first charcoal and then ash in the wind. The hand pump to draw water had been cut, dented, and all but completely melted, with its water hissing into steam. But not one house or building neighboring the village square was damaged beyond some soot. Not one person other than them was injured or dead. Both Jonin had exclusively used Bukijutsu. The reason for that restriction was that they were surrounded by Root agents holding the village hostage. "You're tamer than your reputation," Rinji smirked behind his mask, but he was frowning internally. It was that very reputation that had kept them limited to Bukijutsu, which didn't have a wide destructive footprint. He knew that the moment an arbitrary number of hostages died, she would use that as an excuse to escalate the fight to her fullest capabilities. She would claim that he had no intention of letting the hostages leave alive, forcing her to make a strategic decision to eliminate him at the cost of the hostages as a matter of national security. The village's old women and children, their deaths were acceptable if it meant a Root Jonin died. She was that ruthless and had the capability to see it through. He could even see the narrative that the villagers were knowingly complicit with Root in their illegal activities to calm the Fire Daimyo and his court. That was the worst-case scenario for Rinji. His men were on a suicide mission. They knew that unless he managed to defeat the enemy, they weren't getting out alive. However, fighting wasn't on Rinji's mind because an extended fight against an Uchiha was contrary to his goal, which was to be in good enough physical condition to escape. His job was to delay her and the establishment of the Leaf's backline support base. As long as the healers and the supply line were obstructed, the rest of the Leaf troops would be less aggressive in their approach, allowing Lord Danzo a better chance of escape. When his job was done, he was going to escape, leaving his subordinates holding the hostages behind. Sayuri would have to stay behind, giving him enough time to get an irrecoverable head start. In truth, he wanted to occupy 2 Jonin, but he couldn't blame the Leaf for trusting Uchiha Sayuri to handle him alone. Renji raised his staff in defense as Sayuri vanished from her spot, only to reappear before him. He pushed chakra out through his staff to drive away the fires exploding out of the sword on impact. She tried to kick his knee in, but he shifted his long staff to stop her leg and stepped back. She closed in, leaving only enough space for her sword, which moved faster than any other Kenjutsu user. That wasn't true. She was fast, but it was her fluid chaining of movements that made it seem like she was moving so fast that it felt harder to counter her. It was her eyes. Renji didn't dare look at the Sharingan. He knew that she was reading him with red eyes. They had fought a lot in the time they had started their exchange because she had actively pushed, and even though they had restricted themselves to Bukijutsu, for someone like him, whose combat style was built around his staff, it gave too much away. Being completely honest, he was in trouble. Kenoto would have mocked him, then lectured him on either not fighting at all or finishing the fight as quickly as possible. However, he wanted to have some fun. He had always wanted a one-on-one fight with an Uchiha, and the time they attacked Uchiha Shursui didn't scratch that itch. Not to mention, the man managed to escape. And since the plan was to escape without a serious fight, it didn't matter if she read him. Of course, he understood the risks if things went wrong. Seeing that she was trying to eliminate his weapon, he decided to do the same and stepped in to eliminate space for her sword, only for her to spin around and slam her foot into his chest, sending him flying a few meters. Sayuri immediately sheathed her sword at her side before drawing it again, leaving a wall of fire in its wake as it tried to burn through him. Renji stepped aside only for her to release another cut from her sheath, creating another wall. The 2 walls crossed at one point behind him, thus trapping him on 3 sides. That's not going to be enough, he muttered as he swung his staff to create an opening in the wall, but the moment he stepped through, another vertical slash swung close by, creating a 3rd wall and forming a Z-shape. He immediately realized he couldn't see her. His body tensed as he focused his senses, and a second later, a sword pierced through the fire. Renji thrusted his staff forward with explosive force and parried the strike, the collision of fire-natured chakra creating a concussive crack that shattered the already broken cobblestone. The firewall also pushed away from the shockwave, reintroducing both Jonin once more. Renji didn't overextend, he spun the metal staff behind his back, using the momentum to swing a horizontal arc aimed at Sayuri's ribs. She dropped flat, the sheet of flame passing inches above her head, and surged forward with a low thrust. Renji slammed the butt of the staff into the ground. A wall of fire erupted between them, acting as a momentary shield while the tip of the sword struck the staff, a testament to the rude Jonin's skill with Bojutsu. Sayuri sliced through the curtain of heat, her blades wind like fire cutting a vacuum through the flames, and met him in the center of the square. The exchange was a blur of high-velocity geometry. The staff offered Renji superior reach and leverage. He used it to keep Sayuri at a distance, raining down heavy overhead strikes that forced her to stay on the move. Sayuri used her superior speed to stick to the staff, sliding her blade along the metal to close the gap. Each time their weapons met, the temperature in the square climbed. They were both breathing in short, shallow gasps, filtering the oxygen-starved air. Renji attempted to end the stalemate. He spun the staff in a vertical wheel, building centrifugal force until the weapon appeared as a solid disk of fire. He stepped into a massive, downward smash. The ground beneath Sayuri's feet liquefied into a glowing slurry of slag as the strike descended. She didn't retreat under pressure. As the staff came down, she angled her sword at a steep, 45-degree angle. Instead of meeting his blow head-on, she allowed the staff to skid along the flat of her blade. The friction sent a spray of sparks into the air, but the force of the strike was diverted into the ground. The tomo in her eyes was spinning rapidly as she pinned Renji's weapon into the ground using its own momentum. She rotated her body, her sword trailing her like a lace of crimson light, the blade aimed for his throat. Renji didn't have a choice. He let go of his staff and leapt back with all of his might, causing an explosion beneath his feet and sending slag toward her. As he retreated, 5 chakra threads shot out from his fingertips towards his staff, intending to pull it out of the ground. An orange flash zoomed through the air, cutting the strings the moment they latched onto the ground. Renji immediately flowed into a set of hand seals. If he couldn't get his weapon, then he was going to make one. Chakra flowed from his hand and formed an identical rigid staff, only this one was composed of solid fire and glowed like pure plasma. It couldn't replace his staff, but it would have to do. Renji was about to charge forth, unwilling to give his enemy the momentum, when he felt the temperature shift. Huh! Fire release, Great Dragon Fire Jutsu. The fires parted, and a dragon head-shaped fireball, as tall as a building, roared and thrashed towards him, carving up the ground. His eyes widened from the utter surprise of seeing the jutsu. That wasn't a jutsu that could be contained. Even if he could protect himself, that wouldn't stop the jutsu from wreaking havoc on the surroundings. The safe hostages were the only reason they had maintained a status quo. Had she decided to just go ahead and kill the hostages by herself and blame it on him? "You mad woman," he yelled, and he thrust the flame staff forward. He swung the staff, and it clashed against the dragon's head. The ground beneath his feet shattered as he stopped the ninjutsu with his physical strength, but it didn't work. The staff couldn't hold its form and exploded into fire, leading the head to ram into him like a bull. The dragon head, along with Renji, rammed into several village buildings before exploding in a wave of fire that spread destruction into an even larger area. If there was anyone there, they were dead. Renji exploded out from the rubble, his body badly burned. His nerves were screaming in pain, but he couldn't give them attention because his opponent had decided to escalate to madness. His eyes frantically looked around for Sayuri, only for him to catch a figure through the fire and smoke. It was one of his subordinates. He was standing safely just at the edge of the area of fiery destruction. Renji narrowed his eyes, wondering why he was just standing there with no signs of panic or alertness until he saw that the man's body was limp, his head fully tilted back on his neck, staring blankly into the sky. Then a second subordinate entered his line of sight. She, too, stood there like the other one, as though completely detached from reality. "Genjutsu," he uttered in realization, and a strong one at that. That could be the only explanation. As Renji caught his bearings, he heard something he hadn't registered while he was in the thrill of battle. He looked far off in the distance, on the other side of the village, to see the villagers being escorted by Leaf Shinobi away from the village. He could hear children crying and people shouting, pushing each other to be as far from the danger as possible. Similar sounds were coming from behind him as people escaped. Then the woman walked through the sea of flames, the tip of her sword scraping against the ground, turning the dirt into a molten flow. "If you want to blame someone, blame Yuhi Kurenai," Sayuri said as her chakra actively interfered with the surrounding fires, extinguishing some and fueling others. Yuhi Kurenai, the Leaf's Genjutsu mistress. Suddenly, the Genjutsu made sense. But if they had another Jonin in the vicinity, why hadn't she cast her illusions on him to give the Uchiha a chance to kill him? Why target his subordinates? Was it because of the hostages? Or were his subordinates, spread around the village, easier to ensnare than him? Without her, I would have been forced to let you leave alive. Now I get to kill you. Renji swallowed as he stared at the deadly glow of her Sharingan. Tell me, were you there with Shisui? Your answer will decide how much pain you feel. Or was it because this madwoman wanted revenge and didn't want anyone to hinder or interfere with it? Chapter 505, Shimura Danzo moved through the upper branches as a flickering shadow, his bandages fluttering as he cut through the humid air with the sole purpose of evasion. Every subordinate he had brought with him had stayed behind to intercept the hidden Leaf forces pursuing him. And since he wasn't being hounded by dozens of Leaf shinobi, they had met his expectations. Instead, there were only 2 streaks of green and blue-gray in pursuit of him. Hatake Kakashi and Might Guy moved in unspoken synchronization, shattering bark of trees as they pushed to close the distance. He didn't expect his subordinates to stop 2 of the Hidden Leaf's most dangerous Jonin. However, he had expected as much from Orochimaru, but seeing that there was not a scratch on the 2, the traitor without a loyal bone in his body had definitely let them pass just to spite him. Danzo pursed his lips, utterly displeased. The only silver lining was that escape would have been far more difficult if he had 3 instead of the current 2 Jonin after him. His last encounter with Itachi and his accursed eyes hadn't been an enjoyable one and had forced him to recover for months, unable to use his own powers for extended periods of time. He didn't look back. He reached into his robes and flicked his wrist. 3 shuriken hissed through the air, infused with wind chakra to boost their speed. Kakashi's borrowed Sharingan spun, tracking the silver glint of the rotating blades. He didn't slow and only tilted his head a fraction of an inch, allowing one to whistle past his ear, while his own kunai intercepted the other 2 in a shower of sparks. If it had been any other shinobi, the kunai would have been cut through, ending in decapitation. The tree beneath Guy exploded, the trunk cracking as though it had been chopped by an axe. Early leaf gale. Danzo's old body twisted midair, his cane sword unsheathed in a heartbeat. He channeled a razor-thin edge of wind into the blade and met Guy's heel. The collision sent a circular shockwave through the leaves, stripping a dozen trees of their foliage. Guy used the momentum to flip backwards, landing on a lower branch, while Danzo used the force to propel himself further away, deeper into the thicket. The forest was favoring Danzo's evasive maneuvers, so Kakashi finished the seals and slammed his hands together. The terrain changed the moment his sandals hit the dirt. The ground roared as the soil rose up in the shape of 3 massive, lupin heads that lunged upwards, their jaws snapping at Danzo's feet. To avoid the earthen maws, Danzo was forced to dive towards the forest floor. However, Kakashi had already moved onto his next jutsu, his hand glowing with a jagged, chirping blue light, reminiscent of 1,000 birds. Lightning release, Chidori. Pure lightning chakra coalesced around his hand to the point of becoming visible. It was Hatake Kakashi's special ninjutsu. The lightning cutter hummed with enough intensity to vibrate the air. His figure cut a blue line through the air towards Danzo's sternum. He weaved hand seals. Wind release, vacuum great sphere. Danzo exhaled a massive, invisible pocket of compressed air. The wind met the lightning head-on. Kakashi's lightning cutter pierced through the vacuum sphere until most of his arm was inside, but could go no further. The 2 B-rank jutsu energies buckled against each other. The grass down below flattened against the earth, and the ground itself groaned apart under the torment. In the end, wind triumphed over lightning, but the concentrated lightning chakra of the Chidori and the skill behind the jutsu managed to burn enough oxygen that it caused an explosion inside the sphere. The wind fanned the flames, indiscriminately dousing both parties in their heat. As the fiery explosion cleared, Guy saw his window. He was stood 20 paces away, muscles straining against his green jumpsuit. The air around him sizzled as he reached into his body and found the 8 chakra gates that regulated the flow of chakra and opened the first 3 gates at once. First gate, gate of opening, located in the brain's left hemisphere. Second gate, gate of healing, located in the brain's right hemisphere. And finally, located at the top of the spinal cord. Third gate, gate of life, open. A green glow covered his body while his skin turned red from the accelerated blood flow inside his body as the blood pressure was raised beyond human levels. Whatever sweat happened to drip upon the air evaporated instantly, wreathing Guy in white mist as he stepped forward. He disappeared. Danzo's decades of experience screamed at him that he was in grave danger. Unable to move in midair, he ripped off the bandages over his eye to reveal the first of his borrowed powers. The Sharingan glowed red with its 3 tomo, and suddenly, the world seemed to slow down for him. Danzo took in a deep breath. He had never experienced anything like it, even in his prime as a Jonin. It was only a moment and only one ability of the eyes, but he truly understood why villages around the lands instructed their men to flee if they ran into a Sharingan-bearing Uchiha. His eyes snapped towards Guy flying through the air towards him. The Sharingan's vision, which slowed everything, could only make the least noble green beast seem like he was moving at a normal pace, which was still blazingly fast for everyone else. So, Danzo asked himself on question, was his body capable of reacting to his improved vision? He was far too old to be on the battlefield, and unlike Hiruzen, the passage of time hadn't been charitable to him. It had already been over a decade since he had been able to move at the speeds he could reach in his prime. That would have been a problem a few days ago, but now? Guy struck with a barrage of a dozen strikes delivered in the span of a second, each one thrown with the specific intent to kill. Danzo raised his cane sword and parried each strike that came as though his age had no bearing on his physique. Despite the pressure, Danzo remained clinical. He allowed Guy's final kick to connect with his forearm, using the impact to slide backwards while retrieving a pair of shuriken and breathing wind chakra through them to create Fuma Shuriken composed entirely of wind chakra. Wind release, vacuum blade. The wind-infused shuriken sliced through the air as they headed for Guy. He reached for a pair of nunchaku, but before he could whip them out in his defense, Kakashi appeared in front of him, precisely jamming a kunai in the center hole of the first shuriken and then using it to stop the second shuriken. Kakashi closed his left eye, his breathing steady. He gazed at Danzo's right eye, which now bore a Sharingan like the one in his left eye. That's... Kakashi nodded at Guy's trailing statement. That eye was Uchiha Shirsui's stolen eye. For the first time, the hidden leaf had concrete proof that Danzo had stolen a Sharingan and, thus, conclusive proof that he was the one behind Shirsui's death. However, the question was, why only one eye? Both of Shirsui's eyes were missing, so why had he only transplanted one? Was it because of the chakra burden? Those outside of the Uchiha bloodline with a transplanted eye couldn't turn off the Sharingan, making maintaining one eye a burden in itself. 2 eyes would be twice as much of a drain. Kakashi also thought back to Orochimaru's sudden appearance, which raised a question. Had Danzo sold the eyes to him or someone else? There could be a number of possibilities about what had happened to that singular eye. Something else is wrong as well, Kakashi said, reopening his left eye. The flow of chakra inside Danzo was unlike that of a man of his age. Even though Danzo was a Jonin, Kakashi had a chance to observe other Jonin of advanced age. Chakra was a product of equal parts physical and spiritual energy. The decline of the physique was a normal part of aging, and with it came a reduction of physical energy. When one of the two energies declined, a shinobi couldn't make as much chakra as they could in their prime. Moreover, the imbalance between the two energies caused the quality of the chakra to decline. So, on top of lacking its previous quantity, the reduced amount of chakra wasn't even of the same quality as it would have been in a shinobi's prime. Shinobi or chakra users couldn't escape the ravaging effects of age. They could defer those effects through diligent training and self-evaluation, but they couldn't be entirely avoided. Some people's peak was so absurdly high that they remained powerful well into old age. What Kakashi saw inside Danzo was a flow and vitality of chakra that would be present in a Jonin 15 years younger than him. However, Kakashi clearly recalled looking at Danzo several years back during a certain incident, and the man from the third Hokage's generation did not have anything close to the flow of chakra he was showing now. Something had changed in the man since he had fled the village. I did feel that he blocked my previous attack a little too easily, Guy said. It would have seemed arrogant from anyone else, but it was a genuine statement coming from him. I guess we just have to work harder. This is a challenge, and we must overcome it so that we can be better than ourselves of yesterday. Kakashi sighed. Just hearing those words made him tired. He watched Danzo turn tail and resume his escape instead of continuing to fight and followed with Guy hot on his heels. I don't know what he's done to himself, but with his chakra and that stolen eye, we have to treat him as a much stronger opponent, Kakashi said. Want me to probe him? Guy asked as more mist rose around his body. Kakashi nodded, his natural eye fixed on his target. Go at him. I'll look for openings to strike or create openings for you. We can't allow him to escape here alive. Chapter 506. Neither side wanted the battle to stretch on for long. For Guy and Kakashi, the longer they fought, the greater the chances for Danzo to find an opportunity to give them the slip in the chaos of the battle. For Danzo, a prolonged battle increased the chances of injury or the arrival of reinforcements on the Hidden Leaf side. The battle was to end quickly and both sides moved with that in mind. Danzo felt a lightness he hadn't felt in decades. The grafted cells of the first Hokage filled his body with a renewed, vigorous life. He ran through the forest like the wind. No matter how he pushed, his body seemed to have more to give. His chakra sang. When was the last time he could move so freely? On top of that, Uchiha Shirsui's Sharingan granted him a level of kinetic perception that he had never possessed in his prime. He didn't need to slow down in fear of tunnel vision as he weaved around the trees like a ribbon of silk. This was undoubtedly the strongest Danzo has ever been. Fourth gate, Gate of Pain, open. And yet, when he turned around, Might Guy was a blur of emerald light. White mist rolled off his body and his every step shattered the earth. Danzo could track him before, but now, even with the Sharingan, the man was a ghost whose mere steps brought about destruction. What a ridiculous man! Danzo didn't want to be hunted. His chest expanded like a bellows as he inhaled. Wind release, vacuum blast. He spun around while exhaling the compressed air into a solitary wind blade. The wide crescent screamed across the forest, cutting through dozens of trees in its path and reaching Guy where it seemed to slice through his waist as he was about to push off a tree. But there was no scream or spray of crimson as the afterimage blurred and stretched, melting into a meaningless smear. Danzo's fingers twitched when he heard wood exploding and only had the time to catch Guy shooting towards him in his peripheral vision. He aggressively swung his cane sword with a burst of wind chakra. Strong fist, the fist of Vajra. Guy's fist was wreathed in swirling green as it crashed into the dense gust of wind. For a moment, he halted it completely before it spasmed under the pressure and erupted in every direction, causing the surrounding leaves to dance violently. Danzo's defense worked, but Guy didn't slow down. He bent low, slamming his hands into the dirt to pivot into a rapid spin and kicking both legs up. Leaf coiling wind. It created enough wind to clear out the fallen leaves on the ground, shear the grass, and send soil and sediment flying. The first kick was blocked by Danzo's cane sword and sent him backwards, causing the second strike to miss. Danzo managed to convert the momentum of his stumble to keep out of the third kick, but the fourth one landed squarely against his hip. Guy was spinning so fast that he had already landed 3 more strikes before Danzo went flying. He coughed involuntarily with tremors spiking through his body, but he managed to weave hand seals when he saw Guy get to his feet and launch towards him, all with terrifying speed and body control. 3 kunai with explosive tags tied to them whistled towards Danzo while he formed hand seals, thrown at the perfect time. Guy was upon him, and he needed to complete his jutsu if he wanted to defend against the Jonin, but he couldn't just ignore the explosive tags. Fortunately for Danzo, his chakra was singing, so he abandoned the carefully practiced speed at which he usually controlled his chakra. Push it too fast and one risked losing control. His ability to physically wrangle his chakra had declined as it did with age, and so he slowed down. Danzo hadn't tested it, but he knew there was a possibility to regain that speed with the cell grafts, so he pushed his chakra much faster. It obeyed his control perfectly as it once did when he was young. The ninjutsu was a success as wind chakra gathered in his lungs while he inhaled. Simultaneously, he flicked his cane sword to release a razor-thin edge of wind that cut through the paper tags before they could detonate. Wind release, vacuum great sphere. Danzo exhaled a massive, distorted pocket of air that acted as a physical wall the moment his feet touched the ground. However, the kunai Kakahi he had thrown were a feint. Earth release, headhunter jutsu. The earth beneath Danzo's sandals erupted right as he touched down. Kakashi's hand shot up to grab Danzo's ankle, intending to immobilize him. The intention was to pull him down to at least his waist, but Danzo managed to stop before it reached his knees. He jabbed his sword into the earth and pumped an intense burst of wind into the ground. Kakashi, who had been unearthed, immediately flickered away at the last moment, but not unscathed, and while the blast inadvertently freed Danzo, it wasn't enough to get him out of harm's way. Fifth gate, Gate of Limit, open. A chill went down Danzo's spine when the B-rank wind sphere exploded like it were a children's balloon. Guy emerged from behind it, unharmed. Danzo blinked. Guy was suddenly in striking distance. There wasn't enough time to weave hand seals, so he clenched his cane sword, constructed from chakra-conductive metal and forged by master weaponsmiths in conjunction with Fuinjutsu to facilitate Kinjutsu, and pushed chakra through it to send out a small but compressed mass of air instead of parrying the strikes. When Guy's fist came close to connecting with his jaw, a sudden burst of high-pressure wind shoved Guy's arm an inch to the left while Danzo moved his face in the other direction. The next 3 punches were already on their way. Danzo managed to block one, but the next 2 hit him, one in the stomach, the second in the upper chest. The latter caused Guy to frown. Danzo was sent skidding backwards, his boots carving deep furrows in the vitrified glass. A triangular rocky wall shot up from behind him and, the moment he slammed into it, earthen arms and hands appeared from the surface and pinned him to the ground. A few meters away, Kakashi was kneeling with his palms pressed to the ground. "Now!" he yelled. Guy disappeared from view as if he'd used the body flicker jutsu, but it was a purely physical movement. Leaf rock-destroying rise. Guy smashed his elbow into Danzo's chest, using his other arm as support. The earth wall behind them exploded as the sheer force traveled through the body. Danzo's ribs caved under the pressure shortly before he smashed through trees and cratered the ground on impact. Danzo felt an enormous amount of pain as he forced himself to stand up. His clothes were shredded, revealing his bare upper body, making the Leaf Jonin duo, about to move for their next attack, pause. White branch-like marks spread outwards throughout his body, originating from his right pectoral. The branches split into smaller sub-branches and extended down to his lower waist and legs. That itself wouldn't make the 2 Jonin stop. What made them stop, though, was the bone-white right side of his chest, where a man's face was sticking out of the skin. "So, that's what it was," Guy said. "I felt something strange when I hit him there." "What is that?" Kakashi asked. He gazed at the face on the deformed pec with his Sharingan, noting a very faint foreign chakra signature that he had missed when he had looked into Danzo's body. It merged with Danzo's own chakra to create a new combined chakra that predominantly circulated throughout the body. The new chakra was the vigorous chakra Kakashi had noticed before. "He doesn't seem injured." "You think that creepy face has something to do with it?" Guy said, frowning. Kakashi didn't know, but he could guess that was exactly the case. Danzo had been hit by a move that would injure even the most physically durable Jonin, but he looked rather fresh, save for the blood running down the side of his mouth and some redness that was already fading. Danzo wasn't happy about getting hit, but he was satisfied with how quickly and actively his body was healing itself. The pain in his hip from the previous attack had already vanished, with no lingering stiffness. It was like he hadn't been hit at all. When Orochimaru transplanted the first Hokage's cells into him, the snake had warned him of the risks and that any benefits would entirely depend on how well his body accepted the cells. Seeing the invigorated chakra, its effects on his body, and now an innate healing factor, it seemed that his body was compatible with the first Hokage's cells. It was even helpful with the Sharingan, which was a constant chakra sink. He gazed towards Kakashi and wondered how the youngster lived with his implanted Sharingan, given how much chakra the eye ate. It was worth the cost, though. If it weren't for the eye, Danzo would not have been able to track Guy as well. With the Sharingan, he could track the movement of chakra in the taijutsu specialist's body to roughly predict his moves and react accordingly. The 2 young Jonin were playing the hammer and chisel tactic. Guy was the hammer, relentless and powerful. Kakashi was the chisel, the calmer and colder mind who made sure that the hammer's force was focused and true to the target. Fighting them any longer was dangerous despite his improved condition. Kakashi was a great mind, a brilliant battle tactician. Given enough time, he would spin up a lethal plan. He knew they wouldn't break, so he had to clear the board if he wanted a chance to escape. Danzo breathed in, only to feel something hard in the back of his throat. He reached into his mouth and pulled out the strange object. He stared at a small wooden branch with a single green leaf in his hand. For a moment, he wondered if he had swallowed the branch while fighting, but then he saw the pink flesh and red blood on the bottom of the branch, as though it had been attached to the lining of his throat until he pulled it out. He felt the taste of iron on his tongue and spat out more blood into his palm, only for the red liquid to instantly turn into coarse sawdust that he rubbed between his fingers. It was undoubtedly wood that came from within him. The first Hokage's special bloodline limit would release. It couldn't be anything else. He touched one of the white branches covering his body. Just a few hours ago, It was nothing but white skin, no different from the skin beside it, but now it felt slightly stiffer. It had only been a few days since he had undergone the operation, and he recalled the words Orochimaru had said to him the day after. The chances of rejection will remain high until your body gets used to the new cells. It may take a while, so if you don't want things to go wrong, take the medicine and don't exert yourself. All the previous excitement about being compatible with the grafted cells drained away. He had to finish this fight now. Danzo breathed in and felt that his chakra pathways were already warm and pliable. With his age, it would have taken much longer, but the grafted cells had greatly quickened his body. "It has been a while," he said in a gruff voice as he slammed his hands together to weave hand seals, causing gusts of wind to lash out as his chakra was pushed to the limit. The forest began to vibrate as the winds picked up. He gathered a massive amount of chakra into his lungs, his chest expanding to twice its normal size. It had been a very long time since he had used an A-rank ninjutsu, and he braced for the strain and stress that it always put on his body, only for it not to come, at least not to the levels he remembered. Instead, casting one of his most demanding ninjutsu seemed to give him that exhilaration most felt when they used B-rank, only much greater. Did the first Hokage feel like this every time he used A-rank ninjutsu? Wind Release, Demonic Hurricane Massacre. Chapter 507, a colossal, semi-translucent sphere of pressurized chakra was humming at a frequency so high that the glass vials in Kakashi and Guy's pouches immediately shattered. The sphere wasn't solid, but was nonetheless a terrifyingly dense orbit of tens of thousands of windcutters rotating at such high velocity that they overlapped, sharpening each other on every pass and creating a shimmering white dome that appeared solid from a distance. Kakashi saw the seals and the sphere and knew they couldn't dodge the jutsu. The range would be too wide and the speed too high. He immediately summoned his chakra and began to weave hand seals, only for Guy to stop him with a hand to his shoulder. "Preserve your chakra," he said, and then stepped in front of Kakashi. The green aura around Guy turned even more violent, his skin turning redder as his chakra ran even more rampant, unrestricted by the body's natural restraints. The steam rose around him in a column, distorting the air. "Sixth gate, gate of view, open." Danzo let the sphere go, and it moved forward with a speed too fast for an object of such size. The sphere instantly expanded, releasing the horror it was holding inside. It wasn't a storm, but a rotating mouth made of invisible knives, greedy to eat everything put in front of it. The trees around were all forced to bow in the direction of the sphere, the vacuum pulling them into its maw. The nearest tree was bisected, then 2 more cuts ripped straight through the wood, then 4, 8, 16, and so on until the hundreds of intersecting cuts reduced wood and healthy leaves to a fine, airborne pulp of sawdust and cellulose that soon disappeared into the winds, as did every other tree that was in the way. Where the sphere touched the ground, it left a polished basin. The windcutters were so sharp and utterly numerous that they ground the earth into fine sand before reaching the bedrock and polishing it to a mirror finish. Guy did not flinch in the face of the tens of thousands of windcutters spinning in a chaotic, interlocking lattice. The sound was so abrasive, horrible, and ear-piercing, like the screams from the residents of hell, but he had his best friend with him and couldn't let him get hurt. That fact only made him stronger. He lowered his center of gravity, his muscles bulging until the fabric of his jumpsuit threatened to shred. "Morning Peacock," he roared. Blue chakra lit his fists at such a concentration that Kakashi's head throbbed with pain at his attempt to track the blows, forcing him to close his eyes. Each strike was so fast, so laden with kinetic energy, that the friction against the oxygen ignited. 1 punch became 10, 10 became 100. Within seconds, a fan of brilliant, golden-orange flames erupted before him, a celestial plumage that illuminated the surroundings with the heat of a second sun. The more he punched, the larger the plumage grew until it had grown enough to stand as a barrier against the encroaching vacuum. When the two jutsu met, the forest bore witness to a localized apocalypse. The windcutters sought to shred, the flaming air pressure sought to incinerate. The point of impact was a white-hot ring of pure displacement. Centripetal force from Danzo's hurricane met the centrifugal explosion of Guy's punches. Beyond the immediate radius of the clash, the forest was restructured by violence. Trees 50 yards away were planted into toothpicks by stray wind blades that escaped the sphere's vacuum. Boulders were reduced to pebbles, then to dust. The heat from Guy's friction fire turned the moisture in the air into a blinding white fog, which was then instantly whipped into a cyclonic frenzy by Danzo's wind. It was a cacophony of shearing and burning, a terrifying display of what two vastly different Jonin could achieve when the shackles of restraint were cast aside. As the last echoes of the morning peacock's cries died away and the hurricane's roar faded into a guttural hiss, the dust began to settle. The devastation was absolute. For a couple of 100 meters in every direction, the forest was gone. In its place was a wasteland. The wind had carved deep, rhythmic gouges into the terrain, creating a topography of scars that would take decades to heal. But at the center of the ruins stood Might Guy. The mastery of his taijutsu was revealed in the impossible contrast of his surroundings. In the exact semicircle defined by the reach of Guy's fists, the earth remained untouched. Not a single blade of grass was singed, not a pebble had been displaced. It was a sanctuary amidst a storm of absolute destruction. Kakashi's eyes fell upon a red flower on the ground between Guy's feet and the bee that had settled upon it. He looked up and saw Guy, chest heaving in shallow, jagged jerks, his skin a raw, angry red. He straightened himself and took in a deep breath. "Guy, are you all right?" His friend vanished, leaving a sharp gust of wind and dust in his wake. Danzo was on the run. His breathing was heavy, his hair damp with sweat, but his chakra was still singing. That exhilaration still coursed through his veins. He felt invincible, but he couldn't stay and fight. He couldn't see if the duo had survived because of his jutsu, but he had felt Might Guy's defense. It was extremely powerful. He knew the man to be a taijutsu specialist and a talented shinobi. Guy wouldn't be a jonin if he weren't, but he had never given much attention to him while he was coming up through the ranks. Might Guy was never active in the important social and political circles, unlike most in his position. The only notable things about Guy were his impeccable mission record and his connection to the Akimichi clan through the clan head, Akimichi Choza, who was his master. The Akimichi clan had pushed for Guy's promotion to jonin despite the fact that Guy never swore fealty to them. Other than that, he was only a musclehead with a strange personality and a stranger sense of fashion. Danzo had underestimated him. He turned at the sound of repeated explosions and, running through the sky was Guy, each of his kicks generating enough speed and pressure that he was propelling himself through the air. Danzo frowned and spun around to face his pursuer, his feet dragging across the ground as he weaved hand seals. If one A-rank ninjutsu wasn't enough, then all he needed to do was to throw a second. His physical energy had declined with age, but his spiritual energy had only increased. With the first Hokage's cell grafts, his physical energy had gone through the roof, and he currently possessed twice as much chakra as he did in his prime. Wind release, horizon's edge. He exhaled a thin, shimmering line of wind chakra-infused air that instantly expanded into a horizontal disc thinner than a hair. The ring rotated at such a high velocity that it seemed still, if not for the vacuum pressure at its edge that effectively seemed to be pulling the environment towards it. Danzo thrust his hands towards Guy, who was running across the sky, and let horizon's edge loose towards him. The ring was silent as it ignored all wind resistance, and it all but flashed towards its target. Guy stopped kicking the air and came to a stop. He had no intention of avoiding the ring blade and instead assumed a stance. Morning Peacock! Each punch set the air on fire. Before, the flaming projectiles of pressurized air were being spread over an area to stop the vacuum sphere of windcutters, but now, each one of them was directly propelled right at the disc. The ring instantly absorbed the fire, snuffing the flames instantly. But as more and more strikes hit the ring, the disc began to heat up until it suddenly caught on fire, turning from a disc of pure wind to a disc of screeching fire, instantly boosting its firepower. Idiot! Danzo scoffed, feeling confident when he saw that not only had the disc slowed down, but it was now burning. He instantly turned around and resumed running away while summoning his chakra. Horizon's edge was going to slice through Guy, most definitely killing him, but if the man and his sturdy body survived, he would be ready to end the job. Not a single flicker of nervousness or doubt passed Guy's eyes. He just continued to throw punches, his hands and arms a blur as he pushed more and more pressurized air and fire towards the disc that flew towards him. He didn't attempt to get out of the way and just continued to throw punches. Danzo's eyes widened when he saw the ground suddenly light up. He turned around to see 100 flaming projectiles littering the sky, all hurtling towards horizon's edge. It was a constant, never-ending barrage, and to his horror, he saw the disc, which would cut anything that it touched, slow until it came to a stop. Guy didn't stop and continued to punch even as he was falling from the sky. The barrage began to push the disc back until it couldn't take the abuse anymore and exploded into waves of strong winds. Danzo could once more hear the sound of repeated explosions and knew that Might Guy was coming for him. He immediately began to weave hand seals for another A-rank ninjutsu, pushing himself to the limit. Might Guy could protect against 1, and surprisingly even 2, but 3 had to be a limit. However, halfway through, his chakra suddenly spiraled out of control by no fault of his own. He immediately gagged and felt a sharp pain as thin branches burst out of his mouth. The suddenness of the bizarre event made him trip, but he managed to gain a hold of himself, though all of his momentum was gone. Danzo grabbed hold of the branches sticking out of his mouth and pulled out a foliage of nearly a meter's length, seemingly originating from his stomach. They were covered in fluids, blood, and the inner linings of his body just like the last time, only the scale was far worse. He tried to stand, only for his joints to stiffen up and glance down at his bone-white hands, different from the marks around his body. Unfortunately, he didn't have the time to worry about his deteriorating health. Danzo looked up and saw Guy break through the winds, heading straight towards him. His chakra was still in disarray, and there wasn't time to put up a ninjutsu that would be of any meaningful help against Guy. If ninjutsu weren't going to work and choosing taijutsu would be a worse choice than simply surrendering, then there was only one option. As Guy came close, their eyes met. Danzo immediately sent his chakra forth to cast an ocular genjutsu assisted by the Sharingan. When he transplanted Uchiha Shirsui's eye, he gained the knowledge of what the eye could do. He gained the knowledge of the Mangekyo Sharingan and the unique power that dwelt in Shirsui's eye. He already had some inkling about it before he ever got the eye, but it became clear after he gained the eye. Kodo Ematsukami, genjutsu of the highest caliber, due to its ability to ensure the victim never even knew they had been manipulated by implanting experiences, feelings, and memories indistinguishable from reality. It was a world-changing power that Danzo would have immediately used the day after he stole the eye to gain control over the hidden leaf, had it not been for the fact that Shirsui used it before, causing the power to go into a form of recovery. He estimated the recovery period to be about a decade, but with the miraculous healing abilities granted by the first Hokage's cells, that recovery was reduced by more than half. He estimated he would need at most 2 years to use the power again, so he couldn't use it just yet. However, Shirsui's Sharingan still possessed a potent genjutsu ability. Danzo sent his chakra into Guy's body through the ocular medium, only for him to suddenly lose control. This time, it wasn't because of the first Hokage's cells. The chakra coursing through Guy's body was so violent that it crushed the foreign chakra before it could even reach its intended location. Similar to how genjutsu was broken by disrupting the target's chakra, but far more severe and done before the illusion could even take hold. Danzo couldn't believe it. How was the man still standing with that forceful chakra rampaging through his body? Neither the violent green aura nor the red skin could properly do what was happening inside that body enough justice. He had once again underestimated the monster named Might Guy. In his current state, Guy couldn't control his own chakra, making the use of any ninjutsu impossible, while making him practically immune to genjutsu of all forms. Violent Leaf Draw Strength Whirlwind. Guy appeared in front of Danzo, whipping a roundhouse kick into his head with all the force of the sixth gate. Chapter 508. Danzo remembered the burn of Hiruzen's ninjutsu the last time they had fought. He also recalled the many times he had been hit by powerful jutsu, but nothing compared to Guy's foot hitting his face. His skull instantly caved in, and that was only the start. That same boot snapped his neck, leaving behind a severed spinal cord, cracked bones, and torn muscles. The damage extended to his shoulders. The kick was angled such that instead of flying away, Danzo slammed into the ground, shattering his ribcage and causing the bones to break and stab out of the skin. The ground beneath caved as easily as his ribs had. He couldn't breathe. The nerves from his brain that commanded his lungs to breathe were damaged. Not that it mattered, his lungs were punctured in multiple spots. Danzo was dying. His fingers, bound in hand seals, loosened as he lost strength and focus. A cold darkness took hold of his body and vision. Guy didn't let his guard down, but there was a deep frown on his face. 2 long and consecutive morning peacocks were tough on his body. Once he relaxed, he'd likely be in for a world of pain. "Are you finally dead, Lord Danzo?" Danzo's body disappeared as though he had been a mirage all along. Guy's honed instinct screeched at him as a hand laid itself upon his shoulder. "Yes, I died, but then I came back," Danzo said, standing behind him. All his gruesome injuries had vanished like an illusion. Guy's green aura flared as he whipped around, only for his body to refuse his command, suddenly bound in paralysis. "Juinjutsu, self-cursing seal," Danzo recited, and thick, burning red seals spread all over Guy's body before they solidified into black. "What? You are strong, Jonin Guy. Worthy of being a proud shinobi of the Hidden Leaf." Danzo gazed at the back of the man whose chakra was so violent that any normal jinjutsu was useless against him. What was a jinjutsu? It was applying an illusion to a person's senses, causing them to experience things that were not real. Even the legendary Konoha Mitsukami, a jinjutsu so vivid that it could only be perceived as reality, was, at its core, the same as every other jinjutsu. But what if there was a jinjutsu that didn't target people? Instead, it deceived the world by applying an illusion to reality itself, allowing the deceiver to control what was real or not. Izanagi. The forbidden Uchiha Jinjutsu sacrificed the light of their prized dojutsu, but in return, it allowed them to cheat death itself. It was branded as Kenjutsu, and any Uchiha who dared to use it was deemed a traitor as they blinded their Sharingan. Danzo didn't hang around and instantly backed away because he knew that now that he had used Izanagi, he didn't have much time. He had sacrificed Shirsui's eye, putting Konoha Mitsukami forever out of his reach. He had only transplanted the eye less than a day ago, he wasn't even sure it was going to work. The least he could do now that the jutsu had worked was to secure his life. Binding Guy wasn't enough because he wasn't the only source of danger. Danzo bit his thumb to draw blood, weaved hand seals, and slapped a jutsu formula onto the air. Summoning jutsu, Nightmare Eater Baku. "Kill him, Baku," Danzo said as he ran away. The ginormous cloud of summoned smoke split apart as a gigantic elephantine chimera charged forth. It was predominantly dark orange in color, except for its trunk, legs, and the markings around its eyes. Baku had striped feet, reminiscent of a tiger, huge tusks, sharp claws, and what looked to be a beard. It was a creature of legends. The taper trumpeted like an elephant as it released white smoke from its trunk. The ground cracked under the monster's feet as it charged on Guy, who was helpless to move. "What's behind me?" Guy called out, unable to even turn his neck. The crushing blow never came as a massive palm struck Baku from the side, sending the taper chimera flying. Danzo looked back, irritated as Akimichi Choza slammed his giant palm, the result of the partial multi-sized jutsu, into Baku's side. Backup had arrived and his chances of escape were dwindling. If that wasn't bad enough, Danzo could once again hear those damnable repeated explosions, which could only mean one thing. He looked up in the air and didn't see anything, only for the ground to shake as Guy landed in front of him. The binding Juinjutsu had been broken by an extremely strong release of chakra, something possible because of the violently flowing 8 gates chakra within the man. Danzo didn't have a chance as Guy's fist met his face with a similar monstrous force. Guy's eye twitched as Danzo disappeared. One moment, he felt orbital bones cracking under his knuckles, the next, he was swinging through the air. "Again," he said, turning around to see Danzo running away. He turned to give chase, only to find himself reeled in by a powerful vacuum. Guy frowned at the suction from Baku's trunk, strong enough that even kicking against the air wasn't enough to escape its pull. Guy could escape, but it would require an amount of exertion that might leave him in a delicate condition. Danzo had somehow survived 2 of his attacks, but maybe another morning peacock would do the trick. But that would be the end of it. He wouldn't be able to use his arms without a major risk of fracturing them. It wouldn't have come to this if he had some time between his consecutive morning peacocks, but using his special move multiple times so close to each other had put too much stress on his arms. "I'm lacking conditioning," Guy said, breathing in to ready himself. If his arms were out of the equation, then he would just continue fighting with his legs. But then, the suction suddenly disappeared. Guy turned around to see Choza, who had been flung away, swatting Baku with his supersized staff and equally supersized hands. The beast trumpeted and fell to one knee with a furious look in its eye as it focused exclusively on Choza. "Go, Guy!" Choza shouted. Once again, Danzo found Guy right above him. Unlike the previous 2 morning peacocks, the barrage of punches was delivered directly to Danzo. Guy blinked. The strange phenomenon had happened once more. Just when he had inflicted lethal damage upon Danzo, the man disappeared. He stopped punching, and as he expected, felt a tremendous strain and fatigue in his arms and shoulders and even some in his torso. Suddenly, a great amount of opaque smoke erupted in increasingly larger concentric circular waves, clouding the entire region. A couple of 100 meters away, a completely uninjured Danzo ran through the smoke towards the undamaged forest. His right eye was shut, and the light in his Sharingan had completely vanished. The protection of his Anaji had passed. He felt a deep regret. His best avenue for gaining control over the hidden leaf, which he paid with the blood of some of his best talent, was now gone. After today, Root would be a shadow of its past. He was once again further from his objective, but had to escape so he could live to plan another day. However, just then, Danzo heard the chirping of 1,000 birds. He whipped his head around, but the smoke screen blocked his vision as much as it did his enemies. Hatake Kakashi was nearby. Danzo immediately weaved hand seals, but it was too late as the chirping grew all the more louder until it was right behind him. He neither had the time to complete his ninjutsu, nor the chance to turn around to defend himself. Kakashi's arm, spearheaded by his Chidori, pierced right through his heart from his back. Danzo looked down at the palm crackling with blue lightning sticking out of his body. If it had been only a few seconds ago, he could have made the injury go away like an illusion, bending reality to his will, and yet, he was helpless now. If only he could have possessed more Sharingan. "You knew about Izanagi," Danzo said, blood spilling out from the corner of his mouth. Even the first Hokage's cells couldn't help him recover from this injury. "Izanagi?" "I can't say I do," Kakashi replied, pulling his arm out. "I don't know how you did it, but my guess was that it had to do with the Sharingan." Your eye gradually closed through the course of the last minute. "I didn't see any clear injury, even though you got your skull bashed in, so it had to be something, because I don't believe you'd be foolish enough to impair Shinsui's Sharingan facing Guy." "You have always been smart," Danzo whispered, his body growing cold. "In the end, I couldn't become the Hokage, Hiruzen?" Danzo looked back at his life and what shape it had taken. While Hiruzen was a tree leaf upon which light shone, he was nothing but a foundation hidden in darkness. He was jealous, he wanted to be that shining leaf as well. Perhaps he knew that it would never come true, so he accepted his role in the darkness, made something out of it, serving the village from the shadows. However, in the end, despite the enormous scope of his work, he couldn't accept it and still wanted to be the shining leaf. In the end, he had failed to catch up to the man who always ran in front of him, the man he once called his closest friend. A part of him simply wanted to stand on the same stage. "Any last words?" Kakashi asked. Even in his current state, Danzo could kill Kakashi with a sacrificial Juinjutsu, but that would only harm the hidden leaf. He had already caused too much damage. His root Jonin would have been assets to the village, but Danzo could only assume that at least some of them would be dead by the end of the day. The same could be said for the Jonin on the leaf side. He turned to look at Kakashi standing behind him. The young prodigy had grown into a fine young man in the blink of an eye. He thought of Might Guy and his monstrous might. If the 6th gate was so terrifyingly powerful, then he could only wonder how strong the 7th gate would be. He even recalled the few seconds he had seen the Akimichi clan head, who had come at the last moment. Choza had been capable and reliable since his youth. The hidden leaf was in safe hands. Tell Hiruzen to step down. Allow the next generation to take over, Danzo said, his breathing so labored that the death rattle became audible. Danzo lost all strength, and his body fell. Kakashi steadied him as he fell, gently resting his body on the ground. Tell Hiruzen to bury me in the village, hide it from my clan and everyone else, Danzo continued. The pain was slowly disappearing, his end was nearing. If the Shimura clan knew that his body had survived, they would be obligated to bury him in their clan's burial grounds. Such were clan ties, even if it would bring them trouble. Tell him to plant a sapling over my grave, let it use me to grow, I into a mighty tree. And with that, Shimura Danzo, the shinobi of darkness, closed his eyes forever. Chapter 509. The battle lasted a couple more hours. The defeated Root Jonin caused the subordinate agents to scatter throughout the forest. Most Leaf Jonin pulled away after their battle, leaving their subordinates to hunt down the fleeing agents. Aburame Shibi and Inazuka Gaku transported their badly injured but alive targets to get their chakra sealed and stood constant guard as the Root Jonin received medical treatment. Yuhi Kurenai and Uchiha Sayuri took control of the support base, medical tents, and logistical pipelines, ensuring everything was set up and working properly. Hyuga Utsus, Yamanaka Kawamochi, and Sarutobi Asuma took control of the troops and coordinated the capture efforts as the troops spread further into the woods, chasing the scattered agents. Might Guy wanted to go out into the field but was barred and was instead forced to receive medical treatment. Choza Akimichi insisted on keeping guard over the 2 captured Jonin, but it ended up with him in a hospital bed getting rest in the same medical tent as the Root Jonin. Unlike Choza, Uchiha Itachi patiently received treatment in a private tent but had another tent erected right beside his and ordered Shimura Danzo's corpse to be kept in there. Hatake Kakashi led a small group to secure the underground root base. Who secured the base? Kakashi asked. He lifted his flashlight to illuminate the flammable liquid all over the floor. We did, sir. Chunin Saika stepped forward from the group that had secured the base. We secured the root agents trying to set the building on fire, completed 3 sweeps of the building from top to bottom, and shut off the generator just to be safe. Great work. Kakashi gave them an approving nod. We need to get the kerosene cleaned up, he said, looking at the ANBU standing beside him. I will make the arrangements, sir, Takuma replied, not pleased to be in another underground building with connections to Root. But he was similarly thrilled to be in the heart of the enemy he had been fighting for the past year. Would you like me to send for the team from the village? They're ready to deploy at a moment's notice. One of the things he had to plan in preparation for this mission was setting up a team of ANBU and relevant personnel who would strip the root base of anything and everything that could be considered valuable. If you were to send a messenger hawk now, the group would arrive in less than a day. Call them in. Until they arrive, I don't want anyone entering the base, Kakashi said. Understood. I had some of the troops pre-screened and have a verified list of people with clean backgrounds. I'll be forming the security detail from among those shinobi, Takuma said. It had taken Bubuk and many of Takuma's clones many work hours to find dozens of people whom they could trust not to be in Root's pocket, and thus would be trustworthy to guard the location. Kakashi looked at him strangely, and he couldn't blame the Jonin. It was excessive, but he didn't want anything to go wrong. Given that this was Root's headquarters, the ANBU expected to find a treasure trove of information related to Root and their activities that they had never got their hands on before. With that level of information, they could expedite their efforts to eradicate Root's influence in the Land of Fire. With Danzo's death, Root was no longer a top threat, but they still had dangerous remnants that had to be dealt with. Not to mention, with Root's information, they could go after anyone who had ever had a shady connection to Danzo and Root. Takuma sighed, expecting the following year to be stressful. If there was any place where Danzo would have copious amounts of shady dealings, it was the Hidden Leaf Village. He expected there to be chaos and unrest, and given his position, he would be right in the middle of it, weathering the storm. Kakashi wanted a tour of the facility and had Saika show them around. "Is there a reason you are disguising your voice?" Kakashi asked once they were alone. Takuma had been modulating his voice with chakra. "Chunin Saika has people I know on his team. We're close enough that they'd recognize my voice." He was frankly very surprised to see Nenro and Masaki when he arrived at the root base because he was explicitly told that a team of Chunin had secured the root base. Neither of his friends, regardless of their competence and accomplishments, were a Chunin. If it had been anyone else, he would have immediately taken them down for being suspicious, but he knew them well enough to know that they weren't. "Understandable," Kakashi said, shining a light into a pitch-black supply closet. "Good job with Orochimaru. Weasel tells me that your plan played a huge part in the battle." "Thank you, sir. It was a total team effort." "My plan would have been useless without everyone's brave efforts," Takuma said. Even though it had only been a few hours, the memories of the battle were still fresh and just as horrifying in his mind. "My condolences, Captain. Operative Sandpiper was excellent in Fun. One of Kakashi's assault team operatives was killed by Orochimaru. Both ANBU captains had lost subordinates, Itachi more than Kakashi, but even one death was felt. With Nenro and Masaki, he had managed to confirm that none of his friends was dead. He was always excellent," Kakashi said. Given his history, Takuma wasn't surprised by the short response, but Kakashi's following words were entirely unexpected. "Weasel has always talked highly of you, Radel. You have done impressive work, and your work with Root has been monumental. Even in our history, not many can claim to have done what you have accomplished in such a young career." "That's high praise, sir." "Are you ready for it, Radel?" "Ready for what, sir?" "To be a lieutenant?" "Pardon?" Kakashi turned to him. "Why the surprise?" "I might be retiring soon, but Weasel is here to stay, and his scope of responsibility will only increase with my retirement. He's going to need good people under him to manage his responsibilities. With Kingfisher gone, he's going to need another lieutenant to support him, and after today, there's no better candidate than you." Takuma was silent as he realized the situation. Kakashi was retiring, and Itachi had lost his most trusted lieutenant. He would need a replacement, ANBU would need a replacement, and Kakashi's words stood true, he was a standout candidate. However, he and Itachi had an understanding that he wanted to stay active in the field, and a lieutenant promotion would go against that. And yet, putting himself in Itachi's shoes, Takuma didn't think Itachi had a choice but to seriously consider him for a lieutenant promotion. While it was Itachi's choice who he wanted serving under him, he needed to consider the legitimacy of the person getting the promotion. He was a captain, his decisions garnered attention, so he at least had to make an appropriate choice, which wasn't a problem. Itachi could just claim that Takuma was very new and needed more experience, and that would be considered a legitimate reason. However, Takuma had to wonder, if Itachi asked, would it be right to reject the promotion? Yes, while Takuma had to consider what was best for him, Itachi had been a stalwart supporter of his since the day they had started working together. Leaving someone like that high and dry in their time of need didn't seem right, given their relationship. Most ANBU captains wouldn't ever allow him the freedom and resources Itachi had given him, most of them wouldn't even give him charge of a Root squad, no matter how well he had done in the anti-Root initiative. He was too young and new. Being completely honest with himself, if Itachi asked, Takuma didn't think he would be able to turn him down, which bothered him because he hadn't thought about it until this very moment, and he didn't know how to feel about that. "I'm not sure I'm ready for such big responsibilities. I wish to remain active in the field. I have much to learn," he said. "Which one is it? Are you not ready for the responsibility, or do you want to remain active in the field?" Takuma thought Kakashi was going to continue, but he went silent as though waiting for him to respond. "I want to stay active in the field. I fear that if I do accept a promotion, I won't be allowed out on the field. It was Kingfisher's first field mission in a while, and he's dead now. I don't think the higher-ups would like a lieutenant who likes to frequent the field, Takuma said. He wasn't even sure if Itachi would be stoked about that, given the risks. You seem to have a misunderstanding here, Radel. Do you know why lieutenants don't participate in field missions? Kakashi asked. Because a lieutenant is a high-ranking position and replacing them is hard, Takuma answered. A lieutenant was in charge of an entire unit. It took time for someone in that position to get used to their job and start functioning at the expected level. They had to handle much more than when they were only squad leaders and had a significantly higher number of people working under them. If the turnover rate for lieutenants was that high, the ANBU wouldn't be able to function properly, as every new lieutenant would need time to get used to their position. You're right. That is the main reason why the ANBU doesn't want lieutenants out there. But there's no official rule that a lieutenant can't be field active. Kakashi turned to him and pointed his flashlight towards the ceiling, so the light would reflect down on them. There are real-world, practical reasons why lieutenants aren't field active. People, even shinobi, dislike risking their lives in battles. Lieutenants simply don't have the time to be field active. They have their arms full. They can't be absent for a few days to a week regularly. That would leave their unit without critical leadership and important work piling up. They stay home because that's where they are needed. But that's not a problem for you, is it? Takuma wasn't surprised. He had developed a reputation in ANBU without meaning to. Clones, Takuma said. If you can manage and balance leadership and field duty, then do it. Weasel won't complain. Do you know why? He did the same. In the 9 months he was a lieutenant under me, he was field active the entire time. Itachi was an operative for a month, a squad leader for 2 months, and a lieutenant for 9 months, which added up to a year, after which he was promoted to captain. A meteoric rise never before seen in ANBU. So, if you can do it, want to do it, and are confident that you can sustain it, my unwanted advice is that you should take the position. Kakashi walked away to rejoin the rest of the group, seemingly satisfied with his tour of the root base, leaving Takuma behind with a mess of thoughts clouding his tired head. Chapter 510. The majority of the Leaf troops departed the next day, leaving the remaining shinobi to protect the root base. In part, to help with the rudimentary repairs for the damage done to the village by the fight between 2 jonin. The punishment for the villagers for housing root, knowingly or unknowingly, willingly or unwillingly, was to be decided under the Fire Daimyo's law with appropriate hidden leaf representation, but it wasn't something for the troops to involve themselves in, so they simply helped the villagers by cleaning the heavy rubble and getting them started on repair by chopping down trees for lumber. The responsibility for healing the damage to the forest by the battle, mostly the jonin, also fell upon Hidden Leaf. They were required to get the reforestation started by preparing the land and planting saplings and seeds so they would one day grow to repopulate the destroyed parts of the forest. It was to be handled by a special commission whose sole responsibility was to clean up jonin-related widespread destruction. Both ANBU jonin remained behind, but their operatives left with the homegoing troops, the team responsible for combing through the root base, relieving them of their duties. Takuma was the only operative staying behind on site. You should have gone home with them, Bubuk said. You've done enough, go home, Moore added. Hippo nodded. The rest of the Radel squad had come along with the ANBU team. Takuma's subordinates were leading the entire group with Bubuk as the one in charge. Takuma smiled. I'll return home when this is over. Root had been the focus of his life for the past year. He could spend another week to see it through properly. And both Fox and Weasel are here. I can't very well just leave when the 2 captains are staying. Though both captains had told him to go home, he had politely refused. He was grateful that they hadn't ordered him, so he wouldn't be forced to return. So he really is dead, huh? Did you see his body? Hippo asked. He's dead. Itachi had restricted access to Danzo's body, only allowing a few, like the jonin, to see and confirm that the Hidden Leaf's traitor was truly dead. Even among the ANBU operatives, only Takuma and Turn were allowed to see the body, the latter because of her relation to the deceased. Danzo's body was already on its way to the village. The Hokage had ordered the Akimichi clan head to bring the body home. Itachi had also asked Uchiha Sayuri to guard the body until the Hokage personally laid his eyes on it. Takuma showed them around the root base before leaving them to do their work because Itachi had asked for him. So, he went to Leaf's temporary base, erected outside the village, and entered Itachi's tent. There was a bed on one side, and a study table on the other side, outfitted with all the amenities to make it comfortable. It was bigger and much nicer than the bare-bones tent Takuma shared with Aquila. "Sit down, Riddle," Itachi said. They had seen each other barely an hour ago when he had met with Bubuk and others in his office tent. "How are you feeling?" Itachi asked. "I should be the one asking that. You fought a Jonin here, and at Fun. Both of them used A-rank ninjutsu. I barely got a few scratches. You faced Kanoto, too. He was playing with me. I would have died if he were serious from the beginning. It was terrifying when he did get serious back there for a second before you arrived, but I didn't really get injured." Rather, Takuma was feeling exhausted more than anything else. It had been a stressful few days. He couldn't wait to get back home and have a good night's sleep in his own bed. "Kanoto's still alive and thus a threat," Itachi sighed, regretting letting the man escape. "Think he'll just give everything up and start anew? A Jonin like him could start a mercenary career without many problems and live lavishly if he wanted. Or is that just wishful thinking?" Takuma asked. "It's not entirely impossible. Danzo cherished his Jonin. He paid attention to them, made them feel like he trusted them, and made sure they felt valued. It would not be strange if the Jonin were the ones most enamored by him and thus would have the most zealous desire for revenge." "That's just terrible," Takuma sighed. After their brief exchange, he was sure Kanoto heavily blamed him for all the trouble Root had faced in their post-Leaf days. If revenge were on the table, he would be high up on the Jonin's murder list. But they could also be the most free-thinking of the bunch and might have thoughts of their own. With Danzo dead, Kanoto might feel lost now that the most important being in his life is gone. It might force him to reevaluate his life. Though I sorely hope so, I don't think that's going to be the case. "Right, of course." Itachi nodded. "I think a better question is who Kanoto blames and the extent to which he wants to take revenge. For example, if he only blames me and you, he might come at us personally. That'd be the best-case scenario." "Doesn't sound like the best case no matter how you slice it," Takuma scoffed. "But if he considers us, your squad, Lord Hokage, Fox, Jonin Guy, and Lord Choza, or the entirety of Hidden Leaf as the target of his revenge, then the option of reviving a version of Root under him and making revenge their new goal would be much more plausible. We will be looking at a much bigger problem. He'd have to raise the new Root from the ground up to meet his goal. That'd require time, maybe even a decade in preparation and waiting until he has the right opportunity to pull something big. Until then, he might just harass us regularly." Takuma sighed again. Harassment from an angry Jonin was nothing to scoff at. "An impulsive act of passion would be better for us, but if he opts for patience, that puts us at a disadvantage," Itachi replied. "We must plan for the worst case when we return home." "I'll get the team working on it," Takuma said, unhappy because it meant adding another annoying task to the ever-growing list. "Fortunately, we aren't completely helpless. Even if we don't know his current location, we may be able to find him easily." Jonin Asuma recovered an enormous cache of Root's institutional knowledge, everything from financial documents to blackmail, on a Root Jonin's person. We recovered a smaller cache on Danzo as well. I'm sure we'd be able to find a list of their bases and safe houses. "I'm sure Lord Hokage will be proud," Takuma said, making a note to prioritize finding the infrastructure Root had in the country. "Is this what you wanted to discuss?" Getting their hands on Root's institutional knowledge was going to be a massive help in dredging up Root's network and eradicating it. "I'll be direct. I want you to consider a lieutenant position under me," Itachi said, his tone more earnest. "I know that we talked about this when I recruited you, but I need someone I can trust to be my right-hand man." Takuma was certainly surprised. Just yesterday, he he had a conversation with Kakashi about the same topic, but he wasn't expecting the conversation until after the funerals for Kingfisher's assault squad back at the village. And perhaps he allowed his thoughts to appear on his face because Itachi addressed it. I'm well aware that it's tasteless to talk about this now when Kingfisher only died the day before yesterday. Itachi didn't add a but and simply let the statement hang for a second. Both of us are going to be dealing with things that won't leave us with much time. This was Fox's last mission, and he has already settled up the rest of his responsibilities. He'll be gone in 10 days, and I'll be assimilating a substantial portion of his responsibilities under me. Takuma didn't respond immediately. He digested the surprising words, and one thing stood out to him. I was expecting this, but right-hand man, that I didn't see coming, Takuma said. Excluding Kingfisher, Itachi had 2 more lieutenants under him, one of whom had a whopping 5 squads under him. So you're open to the position? Itachi asked. I'm not rejecting it outright. You and I work well together. You are a competent shinobi, I have seen you lead your squad, and I'm confident that you'll be able to lead more if given the responsibility. I'm looking to give you Kingfisher's unit, one of Fox's squads, and of course, your squad will remain under you, each of which is extremely important to me. Why me? Because I trust you, Itachi said directly, somewhat taking Takuma aback. One of Mother's underappreciated qualities is her ability to judge people accurately. One of the reasons I recruited you was that she trusts you. And since you started working under me, I've come to trust you as well. Enough for me to be your right hand? Itachi nodded. I wouldn't offer it to you if I didn't think you were a fit. Takuma pursed his lips. If I were to accept, would you restrict my field activity? Manage your unit properly, and you'll enjoy a level of freedom I'm sure you'll appreciate. Itachi had never interfered with his work, so Takuma felt he could trust him on that. I don't need your answer right now. We will sit down after Kingfisher's funeral. I understand, Takuma said, happy to get some time to think about it. Of course, with the increase in responsibility, I'm willing to discuss and procure increased compensation. I realize that it is important for you, and I wish you to feel well compensated. Takuma silently gulped. Itachi's earnestness was enough to show him that he was serious, but this was a clear sign that he wasn't going to let him say no easily. Chapter 511. The doors to the morgue inside the ANBU headquarters deep within the Hokage Mountains swung open. Hiruzen, flanked by masked ANBU bodyguards, entered the cold room that smelled of formaldehyde. Stag was already present, and because of the special occasion, Sable, the head of the foreign branch of ANBU, was in attendance as well. It wouldn't be long before the ANBU captains also came by, but the first look was reserved for the Hokage and ANBU head honchos. In the center of the room sat an operating table, and on it, a body covered by a white sheet. Show me, Hiruzen said, skipping all the pleasantries. The Irionin in charge of the morgue pulled the sheet off to reveal Shimura Danzo's body. His skin had turned waxy, translucent like parchment, making him look older than he actually was. His right eyelid was sunken. It was where he had transplanted Uchiha Shirsui's Sharingan that had been promptly removed on the orders of Uchiha Sayuri before they left the root base for home. The centerpiece of his corpse was the horrific hole in his chest where his heart should have been. Is it him? Hiruzen asked. We have confirmed it, Lord Hokage, the Irionin responded. It's the body of Shimura Danzo. Hiruzen was silent for a moment before he began weaving hand seals and pressed his hand over Danzo's head. Even though a team of the best Irionin was better at confirming the validity of the body, he couldn't help but confirm the fact himself just to be very sure. It's him, he sighed, his shoulders sagging in relief and something else. No one uttered a word as Hiruzen simply stared at the man with whom he had shared a long history spanning most of their lives. They couldn't know what the Hokage was thinking. Danzo was once the closest aide and confidant to the Hokage. And despite the betrayal, perhaps because of the betrayal, that long relationship with ups and downs held significant weight. Shinobi of Darkness, that's what they called him, right? He doesn't look like it, does he? Hiruzen said. Stag and Sable gazed at the man who once held both of their positions. In fact, he was the one who had split ANBU into two branches as his last act as the sole ANBU commander. Neither felt any love lost for him because of their positions and the headaches Root had caused them over the years, even before the defection. But they had to agree, the body in front of them looked like that of a tired, elderly man with a slack jaw and sunken eyes. What are these marks? Hiruzen pointed at the branch-like marks all over Danzo's skin. It was paler than the rest of the body, withered, and resembled gray, water-damaged driftwood. They looked unnatural. Was he sick with a disease? We aren't sure what it is, Lord Hokage. It hadn't been long since Danzo's body had returned to the village. A full autopsy was yet to be performed. See to it, Hiruzen said. Stag cleared out the morgue to give his father some privacy. Hiruzen gazed at Danzo, who was now forever silent. He thought back and couldn't recall the last time they had met and hadn't had an argument, many of which he couldn't even recall because of how inconsequential they were. He remembered the boy who had raced him to the training ground, the comrade who had stood back to back with him during the First Shinobi World War. In those days, their bond was simple. It was perhaps the will of fire in its purest form. He had thought about it a lot after Danzo's defection. The moment their master, Senju Tobarama, had chosen him as his successor, the mirror had cracked. Danzo's friendship had turned into a desperate, twisted competition, an ever-worsening quest to prove his darkness was more vital to the leaf than Hiruzen's light. He closed his eyes and felt a crushing weight of self-reproach. Every betrayal, the true reason behind Root, the cold-blooded orchestration of the death of Uchiha Shursui and the theft of the dojutsu, even a couple of attempts made on Hiruzen's life that the leaf could never connect to anyone, felt like a failure of his own leadership. Even if it was Danzo's own actions, Hiruzen felt he had allowed his friend to become the monster he thought the leaf might need. By allowing Danzo to sink deeper into the shadows, he had essentially outsourced his conscience. He had kept his hands clean, but in doing so, he had lost his friend to the abyss. He eyed the hole where Danzo's heart would have sat. It made him wonder what would have happened if he had been stronger and, instead of allowing Danzo to sink deeper into the darkness, knowing that he was susceptible to its corruption, he had pulled him out. What would have happened if he had saved his friend's heart? 20 minutes later, Hiruzen stepped out of the morgue. Fox sent this for you. Stag handed Hiruzen a piece of paper. What is this? Hiruzen asked as he unfolded the paper, where he found Danzo's last words for him. I'll grant his last wish. I have a location in mind for his burial. The official memo will say that his body was destroyed by a death seal. For the autopsy, invite the Uchiha to send one of their own, but beyond that, the official stance is that only his ashes return to the village. The Jonin on the Root raid had all seen the body, and that fact would spread among the upper echelons of the clans, but beyond that, the information would be restricted. A prudent decision, Stag nodded. What about Orochimaru? Hiruzen sighed and frowned with a growing headache. His former student had once again done something ridiculous that threatened the Hidden Leaf's peace. What do you make of Weasel's report? If it's true, we have a great problem on our hands. The Uchiha aren't going to be happy about this either, Stag sighed. As the head of the domestic branch, the clans came under his purview. He couldn't imagine their reaction to any of this. The moment one of their grudges was resolved, another ugly one had raised its head, and this one, in many of his twisted ways, was much more dangerous. For now, the problem was contained. Only a handful of people knew that Orochimaru had possessed the body of a presumed dead Uchiha shinobi and had gained access to their dojutsu. All of them were ordered to keep their mouths shut, but that would end in a few days when Itachi returned home and revealed that information to his father, Fugaku, the head of the Uchiha clan. The relationship between the village administration and the Uchiha clan had been on the up and up, but that was only a recent occurrence. There was no telling how they would react to the Orochimaru news. It was very much possible that they would blame the Hokage for it. Danzo was once Hiruzen's closest confidant. In the same vein, Orochimaru was Hiruzen's former student. They could very well frame it as Hiruzen's fault. It's not surprising that those two were in contact. What I want to know is what he was doing there at the base. Perhaps that way we can learn something about their current connection, Hiruzen said. Danzo, in his own twisted way, did care about the hidden leaf and wanted to rule over it. Orochimaru, on the other hand, hated the hidden leaf and would rather see it destroyed just to hurt Hiruzen. The report claims that we have Root's internal records in our custody. There might be information about Orochimaru's relationship with Root in there. Weasel's anti-Root squad will get to sifting through the records when they return, Stag replied. The one headed by Radel. That one, yes. Kingfisher, one of Weasel's lieutenants. He died at Foon. A tragedy. You bring that up, why? He'll need a new lieutenant. And you think he will choose Radel? I have a feeling. Their history, relationship, and circumstances were completely different from what Hiruzen had with Danzo, but given how much Itachi trusted Takuma, he could see a similar relationship of trust forming between the two young shinobi. Perhaps the younger generation could succeed where he and Danzo had failed miserably. The same day, the preparations for celebrations were already on their way in the Uchiha compound. The news of Danzo's death had quickly spread and made its way to the Uchiha. The entire clan, shinobi or otherwise, were in a great mood as their worst enemy, the one who had dared to desire their bloodline, was now dead. The clan had declared an impromptu festival of sorts to celebrate the occasion. While everything was happening, the Uchiha Jonin convened together. The clan's strongest were no different and shared the same joy as the rest of their clan. They were happy that Danzo was dead and that they had avenged Shisui. However, at the moment, their joy was muted as they all focused on Sayuri. She sat facing Fugaku while the other Jonin sat in two lines on either side. Mikoto sat to the right, closest to her husband. The traitorous scum is dead. I confirmed it personally and through the Irionin on the scene, she said to her clan peers. And Shirsui's eyes? Fugaku asked. He had transplanted one eye. We didn't find the second one, Sayuri replied with a slight frown. That had been her biggest concern from the moment she had seen Danzo's corpse. She had even gone through what he was carrying on his person, and the eye was nowhere to be found. Both of Shirsui's eyes were missing, but he was only using one. So while Danzo was dead and it was a reason to celebrate, the whereabouts of the second eye were still completely unknown. It will turn up as they go through the base and the bodies of the Jonin, one of the Jonin offered, and while everyone hoped that to be true, they didn't feel confident. If it wasn't on Danzo or any of his subordinate Jonin, then the chances of finding it anywhere else were close to zero. Let's see the eye, Fugaku said, opting to focus on the positive. It needs to be destroyed. Sayuri produced a sealed glass container, and inside, an eye suspended in liquid. Instantly, everyone frowned when they saw that instead of the red of the Sharingan, the eye was of a pale and dull gray. What is this? Fugaku asked. Whose eye is this? It's Shirsui's. Sayuri frowned deeply. I was confused at first as well, but then I conversed with Hatake Kakashi and Might Guy. They fought and killed Danzo. It was a pity that an Uchiha didn't kill Danzo, but at least he was killed by someone who used a Sharingan. Jonin Guy said that he killed or at least crippled the traitor multiple times during their battle, but every time, it was as if the attack never happened. He described it as though the damage vanished, like he was quickly healed from all of his injuries. A heavy silence fell in the room as the Jonin looked at each other. Everyone had the same exact thought on their minds. Based on the description, it could only be one thing. Izanagi, Mikoto said to the silent room. Sayuri nodded. I don't think Jonin Guy would lie. He's not someone you can shrug off when he hits you, repeatedly at that. And if he said that it felt as though the attack never happened, then it has to be that Kenjutsu. But how? Another Jonin said in disbelief. How can he know about it? The knowledge about Izanagi was extremely restricted. Currently, there were only a handful of people outside the room who knew about its existence. It was a Kenjutsu that sacrificed the Sharingan and was considered a disgrace. And that's why the grade I didn't jump out to them immediately, because even though they knew the Kenjutsu existed, none of them had ever seen a Sharingan that had lost its light. It had been several generations since there was a case of a Uchiha using Izanagi. The implication became clear. Someone had shared the knowledge with Danzo. The first thought in everyone's mind was whether someone in the room had leaked it. It could be someone who is no longer alive, so let's not narrow our scope to only this room. Fugaka's words had an immediate calming effect on the room as they lowered their suspicions, but a faint tension still lingered. Danzo had been in power for a very long time. There wasn't a reason why he couldn't have sourced the information ages ago. Maybe he had chipped away at the information through the years, finding the Kenjutsu's existence from one person, finding the details from another, and then getting his hands on it from someone else. Or it could be a crime committed by a single clan member. They had no way to know yet. Having said that, this is still a problem. After the celebration, I'll be launching an internal investigation about how Danzo came to know about our clan's guarded secret. It will be uncomfortable for those involved, but I hope that everyone will cooperate. Chapter 512. It took 2 around-the-clock days for the team to wrap up the entire route base. It was, frankly, more tiring than the battles at Foon and the base combined. They would have taken it easy if not for the fact that the 2 ANBU captains were required at home, so the team hurried, supported by having their numbers bolstered by Takuma's clones. The journey back home was tough for Takuma. He had been working hard in the weeks preceding the mission. The battle at Foon and the raid were tough, but the 2 days of going through the route base were more tiring. Sensing the job was done, his body finally gave up before he could reach home. Every step felt like he had to drag his feet to keep moving forward. Others noticed and offered to carry him, but he refused help, half because of his own pride, not wanting to show weakness, and the other half because he didn't want to bother others. He wasn't injured, just tired. He could endure it, knowing that his return home would only be sweeter. It was a little before evening when Takuma returned home. He knocked on the front door, feeling impatient. He thought of entering through the back garden, only to hear his name just as he was about to turn. Takuma. Mariboshi stood at the front gates. He had a fish hanging from a wire at his side that he had spearfished. It was the perfect size for both of them to share over a meal. "You were expecting me?" Takuma asked. Mariboshi wouldn't take more than he needed from nature. Mariboshi just gazed, taking in the sight of him. Takuma hadn't told him the details of the mission, only that if things went as they expected, it was going to be dangerous at the very least. The news of Danzo's death had already reached everyone in the village. That was all Mariboshi needed to guess what Takuma had done. "Welcome back. I'm home." It had been stressful when the other shinobi returned, but Takuma didn't come home. He had lost many over the course of his life. It was part of the shinobi life, and it never got any easier. "You are exhausted." Takuma nodded. "Would you like to take a bath?" "Only a wash. I'll fall asleep in the tub if I take a soak." "Then a warm meal before you rest." "That'd be perfect." Mariboshi walked to him and hugged him with one arm. Takuma smiled, returning the gesture with both arms and feeling the remaining tension slip right off him as he finally felt at home. The next morning, a sizable group of ANBU gathered in a training ground that had been closed off for the day. The majority of the numbers were made up of the operatives and staff under the ANBU captains Fox and Weasel. Among those present were ANBU Commander Stag and departmental friends of the operatives who had died. All were dressed in mourner's black as they gathered to pay their respects to their fallen comrades. Their official funerals had been held the same way as all the shinobi who had fallen doing their duty during the raid against Root. Besides the funerals, ANBU observed a long-held tradition to add a personal touch to their farewells because the families of the fallen couldn't advertise that their loved one had died serving the country as an ANBU. Sometimes, the families didn't even know that their loved one was ANBU, and the department preferred to keep it that way. To acknowledge them, most operatives considered being ANBU a matter of pride. ANBU held an informal ceremony. In front of the gathered people, a stonemason, a retired shinobi with an earth affinity, carefully carved the names of the fallen ANBU into one of the many memorial stones around the Hidden Leaf village so they were memorialized with other fallen Hidden Leaf shinobi who were considered worthy. It wasn't anything special. The other names on the stone were those of killed-in-action shinobi, not a single ANBU among them. The only thing that made it different was that for regular shinobi, the families were informed of the stone's location afterwards. ANBU's ceremony had them pay their respects as the names were carved out. Those who attended the ceremony were required to arrive before the carving began and stay until the mason was done. The fallen comrades had given their lives, the least the others could do was spare some of their time. Takuma watched Kingfisher's real name being inscribed in stone along with the rest of his subordinates. There was also Kakashi's assault squad operative. He couldn't help it when his eyes were pulled to the top few lines of the stone where Riku's name was engraved among others who had died in the Steamfrost War. This particular memorial stone was new, and the Steamfrost War was the last event in which a large number of Leaf Shinobi had died for their village. He looked around, and many looked emotional, which showed that even trained spies struggle with holding back their emotions. Though different, the emotions in the place were the same as the first time he visited the memorial stone with Anko and Kamiko and the letters he wrote to Daiki and Iori about it. He tore his eyes away from Riku's name and looked around, his gaze settling on the pale-faced Yatso and his plastered hand. They had avoided the worst-case scenario of losing the hand. Unfortunately, the Irionin weren't able to start significant treatment on time. It was too soon to tell, but it was all but confirmed that Yatso would lose some functionality in his injured hand. For shinobi who heavily relied on hand seals for all jutsu, a lasting injury in the hands was perhaps the worst sign after amputation. Yatso and Koyol, the assault squad's Irionin, stood afar from each other. They hadn't said a word to each other since they had returned home, but it appeared that Koyol was burdened by self-blame for the damage to Yatso's hand. Even though Yatso knew the risks and accepted responsibility for his hand by agreeing to wait while Koyol participated in the battle plan against Orochimaru, emotions were a fickle thing. Given Yatso's larger-than-life nature, he just needed some time to come to terms with the situation before he returned to a semblance of his usual self. "Did you have a good rest?" Itachi asked as he settled beside Takuma. "A quartet could have performed an entire set in my room, and I wouldn't have known," Takuma replied, looking rested by his standards, which meant he still looked perpetually tired. "How about you?" Itachi nodded. Both had questions for each other, but they decided to keep them to themselves so as not to sully the honor of their comrades. "Mother asked if you were all right. I told her that you were tired but uninjured." "She found out?" "She tricked me," Itachi said, sighing. "She asked about it with such confidence that I truly thought she had somehow gained that information. I asked how she knew. She replied that she didn't, but I had just confirmed it. It was a truly inane mistake." "Well, don't blame yourself completely. You were tired, in the safety of your home, talking to your mother. It's not surprising that it somehow slipped out," Takuma said, not a hint of flattery in his tone. Takuma's competence was the prime reason why he had asked him to fill the open lieutenant position, but it was the comfort between them that had led him to offer him the most important squads under him. In essence, this made him his right-hand man. They had opposing ideas, argued a normal amount, and disagreed on many things, but there was a level of comfort and respect that ensured that no resentment lingered. They could put aside their differences in opinion to come together to find a proper solution for any problem they had. "May I ask you a question?" Itachi asked. "About what? Why were you afraid of me?" "Pardon?" "When we first met, I had an acute sense that you were afraid of me. Was I wrong?" "No, you were not," Takuma said. He scratched the back of his head and stared at the numerous names on the memorial stone. "At that time, I was afraid of death. I mean, I still am, but not to that extent, and at that time, a Jonin seemed like the biggest threat to my life." "Even though we're from the same side?" "I'm sure you know that doesn't mean much because the man we have been hunting for the past year and the freak you fought were supposed to be on the same side," Takuma said with ample negativity. "When I saw you, I couldn't wrap my brain around you. How could someone so young be so powerful? The level of power you held while looking the same as me was something I couldn't even imagine back then. So yeah, I was terrified back then. And now? It was the fear of the unknown. Now, I like to believe that I understand you. I see. Thank you for sharing that with me. I'm busy tomorrow. Itachi was going to break the Orochimaru news to his clan, but I want to meet you the first thing the day after tomorrow, and I want your answer. Chapter 513, News of Shimura Danzo's death at the hands of the Hidden Leaf began to spread around the world and reach the heads of the great powers. In the Land of Wind, Raza of the Gold Dust, the fourth Kazekage, sat in his office overlooking the desert expanse of the Hidden Sand Village. His dark eyes, complementing his auburn hair, were locked in a frown, giving him a stern appearance as he read the report on the death of Shimura Danzo. The miserable blight is dead, Raza spat. I wish he hadn't died. The members of the advisory council looked at the Kazekage in surprise. There wasn't a single person in the entirety of the Hidden Leaf that Raza wouldn't wish death upon. Danzo and his schemes had been a persistent problem for the Hidden Sand for decades, and he was high on the list of people whom Raza wished had never been born. Why is it that he kicks the bucket just when he becomes a problem for the Hidden Leaf and no one else? And he dragged all his jonin with him. Raza threw the report aside and walked to the window that had the best view of his village. After the Third Shinobi World War, the Wind Daimyo started outsourcing missions previously given to the Hidden Sand to the Hidden Leaf instead. The hedonistic ruler of their country was a miser who hoarded the country's wealth in his coffers rather than using it for the betterment of his people. He had reduced the funding to the Hidden Sand, and it would have been one thing if it were just them, but the flow of tax money to civilians in need around the country had also slowed since the war. The war had cost the country a lot of money, and the daimyo wanted to recoup all of it as soon as possible, even if it meant choking his country. The Hidden Sand had tried to be competitive, but the Hidden Leaf offered cheaper service owing to the decades of proper infrastructural and organizational development that allowed them to beat the Hidden Sand on the price of service despite hailing from another country. Why would the civilians care that their own hidden village was being hampered? Their only concern was about who was offering reliable service at a lower price. The only reason the Hidden Sand hadn't regressed was that Raza had been supplementing the reduced funding and lower revenue by selling gold dust, and even that was only a stopgap measure. While his gold dust stopped them from regressing, it hadn't allowed them to grow. Sooner rather than later, cracks would appear, and the Hidden Sand would slowly crumble from within. Pull everything we have en route, Raza said after a while. I want to get into contact with anyone who's alive, be it agents or any of their allies who might be under threat from the Leaf. Tell them we might be able to help if they agree to work for us. The people who had been working with Root were now disenfranchised to a certain degree. The almighty Shimura Danzo, who might have protected them from the shadows, was no longer alive. Before now, most of them wouldn't have worked with a foreign entity against their own country, but when that same country was against them, they would be desperate for a lifeline they could latch onto. There was a narrow window where the rest of the great powers would be scrambling to get their hands on the disenfranchised souls, and it was important that the Hidden Sand was the biggest winner. If they couldn't win against a stronger, better-equipped enemy, then they just needed to level the playing field a bit or, better yet, set it to their advantage. I have made a decision, Raza declared to the room. Get in contact with the snake. Tell him I'm interested in his proposal and want to discuss it in detail. If the Wind Daimyo was unwilling to give them funding, then they just had to damage the foreign competition to the point that he had no choice but to look back home. In fact, Daimyo's younger brother. If I'm right, he's fourth in line to succeed after the Daimyo's two sons. I want to know what kind of man he is and if he respects us more than his brother does. Raza wasn't interested in ruling the Land of Wind, but perhaps it was time that their nation had a ruler worthy of its greatness. The borders of the Land of Earth ran alongside a rocky mountain range, making it one of the hardest countries to invade. Its natural defensive advantage was only second to the Land of Water, an island separated from the continent by a sea. Similar to the country's borders, the Hidden Stone Village was also surrounded by rocky mountain ranges, providing a natural stronghold that it was very proud of. The village's infrastructure was built from much of the surrounding rock and stone, shaped into tower-like structures that were interconnected by a network of bridges. The tallest building in the village, with a cone-shaped roof, was the Tsuchikage's office and residence, bearing the kanji 4 Earth on it. Ba! Anoki, the third Tsuchikage of the Hidden Stone, threw a scroll across his office in anger. The people in the room flinched as the scroll hit the wall and fell to the floor. "I want my money back!" Inoki yelled. When he heard of Danzo's defection, he had been elated because the holier-than-thou Hidden Leaf had lost their warmongering puppet master. The man had thwarted many a hidden stone plan when he was running the ANBU and then had caused trouble with that little secret outfit of his. Inoki heard that Hiruzen had been under all kinds of pressure because of his old pal's actions, and it brought him great joy. The cherry on top was that an Uchiha Jonin had died and had his eyes stolen. That was the sweetest of them all. Any misery to Uchiha Madara's kin was music to his ears. In fact, he decided to make an opportunity out of his enemy's moment of weakness. He reached out to Danzo to see if the warmonger would like to do some work. And as Inoki expected, the kicked-out dog was in need of funds and readily accepted any work as long as it wasn't in the Land of Fire. To be precise, he rejected any job that he perceived was a threat to the Hidden Leaf, which were most of them. The jobs he did accept were so inconsequential that anyone could do them. And so, Inoki pushed off jobs that he didn't want to be connected to the Hidden Stone. If the jobs went well, it was good for him, but if things went south, his hands would be clean, and he would have something to hang over the Hidden Leaf's head. The thing about high-profile Ronin was that people liked to blame their village for anything their defected shinobi did. Inoki frowned so deeply that all of his wrinkles deepened. He rubbed his forehead, thinking about Deidara, one of his former pupils, who had defected from the Hidden Stone and had been causing all manner of explosive trouble all over the place. The problem was that he had many active jobs with Root that he had spent a lot of time on. A couple of them were time-sensitive, which would set him up for significant losses. Now, he would need to find someone else, and they would charge him a king's ransom for the expediency that he required. The remnants of Danzo's little outfit tracked them down. Inoki waved his hand to the rest of the people. "I want the information they have. I don't care how you do it, bribe them or kidnap them, I want them here." "It'll be done, Lord Tsuchikage," said the ANBU commander. "It better be." Inoki took deep breaths to calm himself down. Intense emotion wasn't good for people his age, or at least, that's what his doctor told him. "And get me the Akatsuki. I have work for them." The lightning-charged atmosphere of the Reikage's office was punctuated by a sudden, sickening crack. The massive mahogany desk was brand new, a replacement for an identical one destroyed just 2 weeks ago. The fourth Reikage slammed his fist into a pile of intelligence scrolls, splitting his new desk straight down the middle. "A purge!" A's voice boomed, rattling the reinforced glass windows overlooking the hidden cloud. He threw his head back, a jagged, thunderous laugh escaping his throat. The professor finally found his spine, and he used it to snap his own shadow's neck. He had heard much about Sarutobi Hiruzen from his father, who described the old man as a ruthless leader and an unbeatable fighter who dominated the battlefield from the war room and the front line alike. But the man he knew was much softer than what his father described. A man who had allowed an element like Danzo to grow so out of control right under his nose didn't match the man his father had described. Mabui, standing calmly to the side with her arms crossed, didn't flinch. As the Reikage's personal assistant, she was used to the Reikage's tectonic shifts in mood. It wasn't just Danzo, Lord Reikage. Our operatives confirmed the loss of around 5 Jonin and numerous specialized operatives. The Hidden Leaf's combat effectiveness has dropped considerably in a single night. Even if Danzo and Root were declared rogue, there was a chance it was all a ploy, or maybe the two parties could make up. Multiple Jonin were serious firepower just to let go. There was enough motivation that might have reversed their relationship to what it was before. Danzo's expertise itself would have been enough to tempt many in the Hidden Leaf. "Including Danzo?" A asked. "We can't be sure, but it would mean that Root is all but over." Pathetic. To have that much power under your thumb and be forced to slaughter it because you couldn't control your own dog? He stopped at the window, looking towards the southern horizon. "They kill one of our own and then balk when he demands the life of a Hyuga, yet they let that rat murder one of their greatest talents." Uchiha Shirsui's talents were widely known even during his time in the ANBU, and then burn their own house down to hide the smell. Darui, leaning against the far wall with a bored expression, let out a slow exhale as he scratched his shaggy, platinum blonde hair that covered his left eye. Seems like a lot of work just to kill one old man. Dull. It's not dull, Darui. It's an opportunity and a threat. Spun around, his fingers pointing towards the door. Root was the only thing in that village that wasn't afraid to bathe in blood. Their exit left them blind and half paralyzed, and I'm willing to bet my strength that they are still struggling. But that window is about to close. Now that Root is finished, they'll close that gap quickly. Mabui! I want our men looking for the desperate ex-Root who might be looking for asylum. The other bastards will be after them as well, so better hurry. Darui! Increase our patrols on the borders of the Land of Fire. I want all the pomp and show that we can muster. They must believe we're planning something now that Root is dead. I need the leaf nervous. He walked over to his desk and picked up the scroll with details about Danzo's end, cornered in his own base, killed by the very ANBU he had once helped create. And while all of that is happening, while their attention is somewhere else, I want to increase our presence in the Land of Fire. In a cave somewhere in the Land of Water near the hidden rain, Abito sat on a rock. His orange mask with black stripes lay beside him as he stared at the falling rain in silence. A ripple in the rock distorted the ground as Zetsu emerged from the stone beside him. It's confirmed, the creature chirped, its voice grating against the heavy silence. Root has been burned to the ground, and Shimura Danzo is dead. Abito didn't move. His soul Sharingan spun with a slow, hypnotic rhythm. Danzo, Abito's voice was a low rasp. A man who tried so hard to return to the stage he once built. Personal interest flickered in his eye. The Uchiha clan was so close to vanishing from the face of the earth as their coup d'etat gained steam, only for it to fizzle over the course of a single day. Not even the most rational of groups would let their passion settle so readily. It had to be something else, and in this case, it was Uchiha Shirsue's Mangekyo Sharingan and its ability, Kodo Emetsukumi. It was an ability that even Abito was tempted to possess. It was the ultimate tool of manipulation that could have been a great help to hasten the Eye of the Moon plan. Now, one of those eyes was most likely destroyed. As for the other eye, it was officially lost, but if he had to guess, it was with Uchiha Itachi. He had spent a lot of time watching the Uchiha clan, pulling strings to aggravate them further so that a civil war would break out and the hidden leaf would destroy itself. Thus, he knew that the bond Shirsue and Itachi shared was one of brotherhood. Not to mention, Itachi possessed the Mangekyo himself. Abito had seen it himself firsthand. Who killed him, he asked. Hatake Kakashi speared a hole through his heart. Might Guy did most of the heavy lifting, Zetsu replied. A cold, bitter irony settled in Abito's gut. Kakashi, the boy who promised to protect what he considered the most precious in the world, was now among the village's premier executioners. It was perfect. It was proof that this world was a cycle of hatred that could only be broken by absolute peace. From his perspective, this was a windfall. Root had been an elite intelligence apparatus that could have been used to track their movements. In fact, Abito knew that. Danzo was already onto the Akatsuki. He didn't know their true purpose, but Root had been keeping an eye on them. With Danzo gone and his network about to be dismantled, the Akatsuki could have more freedom to move. What about the business you had with him? Zetsu asked. He would never have been useful, Abito said. He had once approached Danzo as a representative of Akatsuki with an offer of his services in the hopes that he could use that as an inroad into Root and perhaps even make his way into the Leaf's ANBU. However, Danzo never took the bait. In fact, that meeting definitely prompted Root's further interest in the Akatsuki. He would have been an asset to Akatsuki if you had invited him, Zetsu said. He would never have been a part of the Akatsuki. Pain and Conan would have ripped him apart. There was a bloody history between the two parties. A history that dismantled the last iteration of Akatsuki and had sown seeds that birthed the current version of the Akatsuki. The goals of the two iterations were similar, but the approach to both of them was wildly different. Another thing. What is it? Abito asked. Orochimaru was in the land of fire around that time, Zetsu replied. You think he was there? With Danzo? A very high possibility. Then the chances of the hidden leaf knowing about his new body are high. Obito didn't bother waiting for an answer. Orochimaru had tried to hide it, but Obito knew that he had either stolen a pair of Sharingan or possessed an Uchiha. After a while, he was able to confirm that it was the latter. He had looked into it and found that not many Uchiha had died in the past year or so, and certainly none had passed in the time period. And among them, only one had died under suspicious circumstances. Uchiha Guki. When the hidden leaf finds out, they will look into him, which means they will look into the Akatsuki. Obito stood up from the rock. I want to know who handled Root. Uchiha Itachi? I know it was him. I want to know which one of his subordinates led the charge. Why? Zetsu asked, confused. Because the person who handled Root, the one who brought the hidden leaf to their door, Itachi will choose that person to pursue Orochimaru, and in turn, the Akatsuki. Uchiha Itachi will release his hound, who will chase until he finds where the bones are buried, so, I want to know who I'll be dealing with. The morning after the funerals, Takuma sat outside ANBU Captain Weasel's office. You can go in now, Radel. Takuma nodded to the assistant and stood up to head inside the office. Good luck. I'm rooting for you, the assistant said. Takuma offered a smile and a thanks. He knocked on the office door. It once made him nervous, but after being in there multiple times every week, it was only scary when he had bad news, or when Itachi was angry. He didn't seem like the type to get angry, but he did get heated from time to time when things went wrong due to stupid mistakes. Good morning, Radel, Itachi said. Takuma sat down across from his boss, and they stared at each other for a moment. Do you have an answer for me? Takuma nodded. I'll do it. Are you sure? It's going to be demanding, more than what you've been doing now. Not to mention, you want to remain field active. I'll just continue to add numbers. I'm due another one soon, Takuma replied. Itachi nodded with a smile, amused. Excellent, your decision has made me very happy. Usually, they would get up, shake hands, or maybe even hug it out, but neither of the shinobi stood from their chairs. It simply wasn't the time for congratulations. Both of them simultaneously glanced at the office door just a moment before it opened, and Itachi's assistant entered with a tray of tea and refreshments for both of them. Let's talk about compensation, Itachi said after they were alone again. Takuma smiled widely. You know me well. That's my job. Then you must know that I'm not cheap. As I said, I know you, which means I also know what you get paid. You are certainly expensive. I deserve it. You certainly do. So, what are you looking for? Not much different from what I'm already getting. I just need it to be stepped up a level. And what do you consider the next level? I feel that'd be something we will be deciding together. Then let's just do that. That day, the two shinobi agreed to the promotion. 2 days later, squad leader Radel was vetted by ANBU Commander Stag. A day after that, Radel's promotion was made official, and by the end of the week, Lieutenant Radel officially took over his new position. That's the end of this tale for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in part 26. Peace.